The heavy rain poured down incessantly, each droplet hitting the old wooden house with a force that seemed to echo through its very foundation. The house stood isolated on a hill, surrounded by dense, dark forests that seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. Its exterior, once painted a vibrant white, had faded to a dull, weathered grey, with ivy crawling up the sides, adding to its ancient, almost haunted appearance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and a faint hint of mildew. The floors creaked with every step as if the house itself was alive, groaning under the weight of its own history. Dust particles floated in the dim light that filtered through the small, grimy windows, casting an eerie glow on the worn-out furniture and faded wallpaper. In this house lived an elderly man named Hiroshi, who had inherited the place from his ancestors. Despite its deteriorated state, Hiroshi was deeply attached to the house, believing it held the spirits of his family. He lived a solitary life, with only the occasional visit from his niece, Eiko, who came to check on him and bring him supplies from the town. One stormy evening, as the wind howled outside and the rain lashed against the windows, Hiroshi sat by the fireplace, lost in thought. Eiko had just left after her weekly visit, and he felt a strange sense of unease, as if something was amiss. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something. He had forgotten something important. His mind wandered back to the stories his grandfather used to tell him about the house, stories of a hidden attic that no one had seen in decades. According to his grandfather, the attic held secrets that were best left undiscovered. Hiroshi had always dismissed these tales as mere folklore, the product of an old man's vivid imagination. But tonight, with the storm raging outside, the stories seemed to take on a life of their own. He found himself drawn to the idea of the attic, wondering if it really existed and what it might contain. With a sudden burst of determination, Hiroshi decided to search for the attic. He grabbed a lantern and made his way through the dark, narrow hallways of the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He felt a chill run down his spine as he approached the end of the hallway on the second floor, where he remembered his grandfather mentioning a hidden door. After what felt like hours of searching, Hiroshi's lantern light flickered over a small, almost invisible door in the corner of the hallway. His heart pounded as he reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked. To his surprise, the door creaked open easily, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. Taking a deep breath, Hiroshi ascended the stairs, the old wood groaning under his weight. The air grew colder and more oppressive with each step, and he could feel the presence of something watching him. When he reached the top, he found himself in a small, dusty attic, filled with old, forgotten items covered in cobwebs. The attic was cluttered with trunks, old furniture, and boxes filled with yellowed papers and photographs. Hiroshi felt a sense of both excitement and dread as he began to explore, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. As he rummaged through the contents of the attic, he stumbled upon a large, ornate chest. Its intricate carvings and heavy locks suggested it was of great importance. His hands trembled as he tried to open it, but the lock was rusted shut. Determined to uncover its secrets, Hiroshi fetched a crowbar from the tool shed and returned to the attic. With a few strong pushes, the lock finally gave way, and the chest creaked open. Inside, he found a collection of old journals, their pages filled with neat, handwritten notes. Hiroshi recognized his grandfather's handwriting and began to read, his eyes widening with each passing page. The journals detailed the history of the house, revealing secrets Hiroshi had never known. One entry, in particular, caught his attention. It spoke of a hidden room within the attic, a room that held something terrifying and powerful. According to the journal, the room was sealed off for a reason, and opening it would unleash a darkness that had been contained for generations. Hiroshi's curiosity battled with his fear as he searched for the hidden room. After hours of careful inspection, he found a small concealed door behind a stack of old boxes. His heart raced as he pushed it open. revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper into the attic. The air grew colder and more suffocating as he ventured further, and he could hear faint whispers echoing around him. At the end of the passageway, he found another door, this one much older and more decrepit than the others. With a trembling hand, Hiroshi pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, with only a single window covered in thick, dusty curtains. In the center of the room stood a large wooden box, similar to a coffin, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Hiroshi felt a wave of dread wash over him as he approached the box. The whispers grew louder, and he could feel an almost tangible presence in the room with him. As he reached out to touch the box, the room suddenly grew colder, and the whispers became deafening. Hiroshi's hand froze in midair, and he felt a surge of terror unlike anything he had ever experienced. In that moment, he realized the truth of his grandfather's warnings. The box contained something evil, something that should never be unleashed. But it was too late. The lid of the box slowly began to creak open, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. Hiroshi stumbled back, his mind racing with fear and confusion. The figure stepped out of the box and moved towards him, its presence filling the room with a palpable sense of dread. Just as the figure reached out to touch him, Hiroshi felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest. He gasped for breath, clutching at his heart as the room spun around him. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the figure's glowing eyes staring into his soul. When Hiroshi awoke, he found himself lying on the floor of the attic, the lantern's light flickering weakly beside him. The room was empty, and the box was closed as if nothing had happened. But he could feel a change within himself, a darkness that had taken root in his heart. Hiroshi knew he could never speak of what he had seen, for fear of unleashing the darkness upon the world. He sealed the attic door once more and returned to his solitary life, haunted by the memories of that stormy night. Years passed, and the house continued to stand on the hill, its secrets hidden from the world. But those who visited Hiroshi could see a change in him, a shadow that lingered in his eyes and a chill in his presence. And though he never spoke of it, Hiroshi knew that the darkness in the attic was always watching, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover its secrets. The house remained a silent sentinel, its forgotten attic holding the whispers of the past and the promise of future horrors. And so the legend of the forgotten attic lived on, a cautionary tale for those who dared to seek the unknown. For in the hidden corners of the ancient house, the shadows whispered their dark secrets, and the forgotten attic awaited its next visitor. As the days passed, Hiroshi's health continued to decline. His once strong frame grew frail, and his mind became increasingly clouded with dark thoughts. Aiko noticed the change immediately during her next visit. She found her uncle sitting in his favorite armchair by the window, staring out into the forest with a vacant look in his eyes. The house felt different too, colder and more oppressive. Even the familiar creaks and groans of the old structure seemed to carry an ominous undertone. Aiko sat down beside Hiroshi, her concern evident. "Uncle, are you feeling all right?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Hiroshi turned to her slowly, his eyes filled with a haunted expression. "I'm fine, Aiko," he replied, though his voice lacked its usual strength. "Just memories." Aiko wasn't convinced. She had heard about the family legends, the tales of the hidden attic and its dark secrets. She had always dismissed them as old wives' tales. But seeing her uncle now, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. Determined to uncover the truth, Aiko decided to stay at the house for a few days. She hoped that her presence would help her uncle and perhaps provide some answers to the strange changes she had observed. During the nights, she could hear faint whispers and the occasional thud coming from the direction of the attic. The sound sent chills down her spine, but she tried to dismiss them as her imagination playing tricks on her. On the third night of her stay, Aiko awoke to find her uncle missing from his bed. Panic set in as she searched the house, calling his name. she found him standing at the bottom of the attic stairs, his eyes fixed on the door at the top. "Uncle, what are you doing?" she cried, rushing to his side. Hiroshi turned to her, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "It's the attic, Eiko," he whispered. "It's calling to me." Eiko felt a shiver run through her. She knew she had to confront whatever was up there, for her uncle's sake and her own. Taking a deep breath, she helped Hiroshi back to his room and tucked him into bed. "I'll go up there," she promised. "I'll find out what's happening." With a lantern in hand, Eiko climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, each step echoing ominously in the silence. When she reached the top, she hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The attic looked just as Hiroshi had described, cluttered with old furniture and boxes covered in dust and cobwebs. But there was something else, a presence that seemed to watch her from the shadows. She approached the large, ornate chest her uncle had mentioned, her heart pounding in her chest. It stood in the center of the attic, its intricate carvings seeming to move in the flickering light of the lantern. Taking a deep breath, Eiko opened the chest. Inside, she found the journals, just as Hiroshi had described. She picked one up and began to read, her eyes widening. As she learned the dark history of the house, the entries spoke of rituals and sacrifices of an ancient evil that had been trapped in the attic for generations. As she read, she felt a cold breeze brush past her, and the whispers grew louder. It was as if the house itself was alive, and it did not want its secrets revealed. Determined to end the nightmare, Eiko searched the attic for the hidden room. After hours of meticulous searching, she found the concealed door behind a pile of old trunks. It was exactly as her uncle had described, a small, almost invisible door that led to a narrow passageway. Taking a deep breath, Eiko stepped through the door. The air grew colder and more oppressive as she made her way down the passage. The whispers were almost deafening now, and she could feel the presence of something evil watching her. At the end of the passage, she found the old, decrepit door that led to the hidden room. With a trembling hand, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, with only a single window covered in thick, dusty curtains. In the center of the room stood the wooden box, its surface covered in strange symbols. Eiko felt a wave of dread wash over her as she approached the box. The whispers grew louder, and she could feel an almost tangible presence in the room with her. Taking a deep breath, she opened the box. Inside, she found a small, ancient-looking artifact, its surface covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the box. As she reached out to touch it, the room suddenly grew colder, and the whispers became a deafening roar. Eiko's hand froze in midair, and she felt a surge of terror unlike anything she had ever experienced. The artifact seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and she knew that she had found the source of the evil that plagued the house. Determined to end the nightmare, Eiko grabbed the artifact and hurried back to her uncle's room. Hiroshi was lying in bed, his breathing shallow and labored. She placed the artifact on the nightstand and sat beside him, holding his hand. "It's over, Uncle," she whispered. "We'll find a way to destroy it." Hiroshi's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at the artifact with a mixture of fear and relief. "Thank you, Eiko," he said weakly. "You have done what I could not." Over the next few days, Eiko researched the artifact, trying to find a way to destroy it. She consulted with local historians and experts, but none could offer a solution. The whispers continued to haunt her, growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. One evening, as she was poring over old texts, she came across a passage that spoke of a ritual to cleanse evil artifacts. It was a dangerous and complex procedure, but it seemed to be her only hope. Determined to free her family from the curse, Eiko prepared for the ritual. She gathered the necessary ingredients and followed the instructions carefully. As she began the ritual, the whispers grew louder, and the house seemed to come alive around her. The walls shook, and the lights flickered, but she pressed on, chanting the ancient words and performing the prescribed actions. Just as she reached the climax of the ritual, the artifact began to glow with a dark, malevolent light. Aiko felt a surge of fear but forced herself to continue. With a final, desperate chant, she completed the ritual. There was a blinding flash of light, and the artifact shattered into 1,000 pieces. The whispers ceased, and the house fell silent. Aiko collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. She had done it. She had freed her family from the darkness. In the days that followed, the house seemed to regain some of its former warmth. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and Hiroshi's health began to improve, though the memories of that dark night would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. They took comfort in knowing that the evil had been vanquished. Aiko continued to visit her uncle regularly, and together, they worked to restore the house to its former glory. The attic, once a place of fear and darkness, was now just another part of the house. Its secrets finally laid to rest, and though they never spoke of it, they both knew that the shadows of the past would always linger, a reminder of the horrors that had once dwelled within the forgotten attic. The nights following the ritual were eerily quiet. Aiko found herself waking at odd hours, her mind replaying the events of the past weeks. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, its oppressive atmosphere lifting gradually. Yet, a lingering unease remained. Aiko often caught herself glancing at the attic door, half expecting it to swing open of its own accord. One rainy afternoon, Hiroshi sat in his armchair by the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Aiko joined him, bringing a pot of tea and 2 cups. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the patter of rain and the occasional creak of the old house. Finally, Hiroshi spoke, his voice tinged with a sadness that made Aiko's heart ache. "There's something you need to know, Aiko." She looked at him, sensing the gravity of his words. "It's about your parents." Aiko felt a chill run down her spine. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was a child, or so she had been told. Hiroshi continued, his eyes distant as he recalled the past. "It wasn't an accident," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were coming here to this house to confront the darkness in the attic." Aiko's mind reeled. Her parents had known about the attic's secrets. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, her voice shaking. Hiroshi sighed deeply. "I wanted to protect you," he replied. "But now I realize you deserve to know the truth." He told her about the night her parents had died, how they had discovered the same journals she had read, and how they had attempted to perform a ritual to seal the darkness permanently. But something had gone wrong, and they had been killed in the process. "Their spirits are still here, Aiko," Hiroshi said, his eyes filling with tears. "They're trapped in the attic, unable to find peace." Aiko's heart ached with grief and anger. She couldn't believe she had been kept in the dark for so long. But now she understood why the attic had always felt so oppressive, why the whispers had seemed so familiar. She needed to free her parents' spirits. With a newfound determination, Aiko decided to return to the attic. She would find a way to release her parents and any other spirits trapped there. That night, she prepared herself for the ordeal. She gathered candles, incense, and the journals, hoping to find a clue in her parents' final words. As she climbed the attic stairs once more, she felt a sense of dread mixed with a strange sense of purpose. The attic was just as she had left it, cluttered and dark. But now, it seemed to hum with a hidden energy. She set up the candles in a circle and lit the incense, the fragrant smoke filling the air. With trembling hands, she opened the journals and began to read aloud the incantations her parents had written. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her in a cacophony of voices. She could feel their presence pressing in on her from all sides. The air grew colder, and she shivered as she continued to chant, her voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at her heart. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the attic into darkness. Aiko's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to give in to fear. She continued to chant, her voice rising above the whispers. As she reached the climax of the incantation, a blinding light filled the attic. and she felt a rush of energy surge through her. When the light faded, she found herself standing in a different place. The attic was gone, replaced by a serene, moonlit garden. Aiko looked around in amazement, her breath catching in her throat. She saw two figures standing beneath a cherry blossom tree, their faces obscured by the shadows. As she approached, she realized they were her parents. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to them. "Mother, father," she whispered. They turned to her, their faces filled with sorrow and love. "Aiko," her mother said, her voice soft and comforting. "We've been waiting for you." Her father nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "You've done well, my dear." Aiko felt a warmth spread through her heart as she embraced her parents. They told her how proud they were of her, how they had watched over her all these years. They explained that the darkness in the attic had been a powerful spirit, one that had been bound to the house for generations. By performing the ritual, Aiko had weakened its hold, but it still lingered, feeding on the fear and sorrow of those who lived there. "We need to finish what we started," her father said. Aiko nodded, determined to see this through. Together, they returned to the attic, the garden fading away as the familiar shadows closed in around them. Her parents guided her through the final steps of the ritual, their voices blending with hers in a powerful incantation. The attic seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the shadows writhed and twisted as if in pain. Aiko felt a surge of fear, but her parents' presence gave her strength. She continued to chant, her voice growing louder and more confident. Finally, with a final, triumphant cry, she completed the ritual. The darkness exploded in a blinding flash of light, and Aiko was thrown to the floor. When she opened her eyes, the attic was silent and still. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a peaceful, almost serene feeling. Aiko stood up, her heart racing. Her parents' spirits stood before her, their faces filled with love and gratitude. "You've done it, Aiko," her mother said, her voice filled with pride. "We're free." Her father nodded, his eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, my dear." Aiko felt a warmth spread through her heart as she embraced her parents one last time. They began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. "Goodbye, Aiko," her mother said. "We'll always be with you." Her father smiled, his face filled with pride. "Live your life to the fullest, my dear." Aiko watched as they disappeared, her heart filled with a mix of sorrow and joy. She had freed her parents, and the darkness that had plagued her family for generations was finally gone. As she descended the attic stairs, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The house felt different now, lighter and more welcoming. Hiroshi was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes filled with hope. "Is it over?" he asked. Aiko nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "It's over," she replied. They embraced, and Aiko felt a sense of relief wash over her. The nightmare was finally over, and she could begin to rebuild her life. In the days that followed, Aiko and Hiroshi worked together to restore the house. They repaired the damaged walls, repainted the faded surfaces, and cleared out the clutter that had accumulated over the years. The attic was transformed from a place of fear into a space of light and tranquility. Aiko planted a small garden outside, filling it with flowers and herbs that brought color and life to the old house. As the seasons changed, the house seemed to come alive, its dark past fading into memory. Aiko often thought of her parents and the sacrifices they had made. She knew they were at peace, and that knowledge gave her the strength to move forward. She continued to visit Hiroshi regularly, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They would sit by the fireplace, sipping tea and sharing stories of the past. Aiko knew that the shadows of the attic would always be a part of her, but she had learned to embrace them as a reminder of her strength and resilience. The house on the hill became a place of refuge and healing, its dark history finally laid to rest, and as the years passed, the legend of the forgotten attic faded into memory. A story told to children on stormy nights, but Aiko knew the truth. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees and the moon cast its gentle light, she could feel her parents' presence, watching over her with love and pride. The summer air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and made even the simplest tasks feel laborious. The old house on the hill, now partially restored, seemed to shimmer in the heat, its windows reflecting the bright sunlight. Eiko and Hiroshi had made significant progress in their efforts to rejuvenate the once dilapidated structure. The walls had been repaired, the roof mended, and a fresh coat of paint gave the house a new lease on life. But as the physical repairs neared completion, Eiko couldn't shake the feeling that their work wasn't done. There was an intangible weight still hanging over the house, something that couldn't be fixed with paint or nails. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, Eiko sat on the porch, lost in thought. The air was cooler now, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the cherry blossom tree she had planted in memory of her parents. Hiroshi joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Eiko and settled into the chair beside her. "You've done wonders with the place," Hiroshi said, his voice warm with gratitude. Eiko smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. "I feel like there's still something here, something unresolved," she confessed. Hiroshi nodded, his expression turning serious. "I've felt it too," he admitted. "There are memories in this house that go deeper than we understand." The words hung in the air between them, a shared understanding that something still lingered in the shadows of the old house. Eiko knew she had to confront these lingering echoes to truly find peace. That night, after Hiroshi had gone to bed, Eiko found herself drawn once more to the attic. The oppressive atmosphere that had once pervaded the space was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness. But there was something else, a feeling of anticipation, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting. Eiko lit a single candle and placed it on the floor in the center of the attic. She sat down beside it, the flickering flame casting long shadows on the walls. Closing her eyes, she focused on the memories she had uncovered. The stories told in her grandfather's journals, the final moments of her parents' lives. The candle's flame danced in the silence, and Eiko felt a presence, a subtle shift in the air around her. She opened her eyes and found herself no longer alone. In the dim light, she could make out the faint outlines of figures, spectral images that flickered and wavered like smoke. Her parents stood closest, their faces soft and kind. But there were others, 2 generations of her family, their spirits bound to the house. Eiko felt a lump form in her throat. "I want to help you," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to set you free." The spirits didn't speak, but Eiko felt their gratitude, a gentle warmth that filled the room. Her father stepped forward, his form more solid than the others. "Eiko," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you have already done so much, but there is one final task." Eiko nodded, her heart pounding. "Tell me what I need to do." Her father gestured to the back of the attic, where an old, forgotten door stood. It was small and unassuming, hidden behind a stack of dusty boxes. Eiko hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight. "The key is in the garden," her father said. "Find it, and the door will open." Eiko stood, her resolve firm. She made her way to the garden, the cool night air, a stark contrast to the warmth of the attic. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver light over the flowers and herbs she had planted. She searched the garden methodically, her hands brushing through the soft earth and under the leaves. Finally, beneath the cherry blossom tree, her fingers closed around a small, rusted key. She held it up to the moonlight, feeling a surge of triumph. Returning to the attic, Eiko approached the old door. The key fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the door swung open. Beyond it lay a small hidden room, its walls lined with ancient scrolls and artifacts. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. Aiko felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew instinctively that this mirror was the source of the lingering presence in the house. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the room and approached the mirror. As she wiped away the dust, her reflection stared back at her, but there was something else, a darkness that seemed to pulse behind the glass. Aiko understood what she had to do. She placed her hands on the mirror's surface and began to chant the ancient words she had learned from her grandfather's journals, flowing effortlessly from her lips. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and the darkness within began to swirl and writhe. Aiko felt a pull, as if the mirror was trying to draw her in. But she held her ground, her voice growing stronger. The shadows in the mirror twisted and turned, forming shapes and faces echoes of the spirits trapped within. Aiko continued to chant, her resolve unbreakable. Finally, with a final desperate surge, the darkness shattered, the mirror's surface exploding in a burst of light. Aiko was thrown back, the force of the explosion knocking the breath from her lungs. When she opened her eyes, the room was bathed in a soft golden light. The spirits that had once haunted the house stood around her, their faces peaceful and serene. Her parents smiled at her, their forms glowing with a gentle radiance. "Thank you, Aiko," her mother said, her voice filled with love. "You have set us free." Aiko felt tears stream down her face. "I love you," she whispered. "We love you too," her father replied. Always. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. Aiko watched as they disappeared, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace. She had done it. She had freed the spirits and banished the darkness that had plagued her family for generations. As she made her way back to the main part of the house, she felt a lightness in her step, a joy she hadn't known in years. The house on the hill was no longer a place of fear and sorrow, but a home filled with light and love. In the days that followed, Aiko and Hiroshi continued their work, transforming the old house into a place of beauty and warmth. The garden flourished, the flowers blooming in vibrant colors, a testament to the life and love that now filled the house. Aiko often found herself standing beneath the cherry blossom tree, the gentle rustle of its leaves a comforting reminder of her parents' presence. She knew they were watching over her, their spirits finally at peace. And as the seasons changed, the house stood as a beacon of hope, its dark past a distant memory. Aiko had faced the shadows and emerged victorious, her strength and courage a testament to the power of love and family. The old house on the hill, once a place of darkness and despair, was now a home filled with light and joy, a symbol of the resilience and enduring spirit of those who had lived and loved within its walls. On a moonless night, the ancient house stood shrouded in an eerie silence, its silhouette barely discernible against the darkened sky. The worn-out wooden structure creaked and groaned as if whispering secrets long forgotten. A chilling breeze swept through the narrow hallways, carrying with it the faint scent of decaying wood and damp earth. This house, nestled deep within a remote village in the Japanese countryside, had a history that the locals dared not speak of. The night was heavy with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The village itself was asleep, its inhabitants huddled in their homes, unaware of the sinister presence lurking at the edge of their peaceful existence. The house known as the House of Night Whispers had once been a grand estate, but now it stood as a ghostly reminder of a tragic past. Inside, the air was thick with an oppressive darkness. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, giving life to grotesque shapes that seemed to dance in a macabre performance. Each step echoed through the empty rooms, amplifying the sense of isolation and abandonment. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing in the fears of those who dared to enter. Mayuki, a young woman in her late 20s, stood at the entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She had heard the stories, the warnings, but something compelled her to uncover the truth hidden within these walls. Her dark hair framed her pale face, and her eyes, wide with trepidation, reflected the dim light. Beside her, John, her older brother, tried to mask his own apprehension. Tall and stoic, he had always been her protector. But tonight, the roles seemed to have reversed. "We shouldn't be here, Mayuki." John's voice was a hushed whisper, barely audible over the creaking floorboards. "But we have to know what happened to them." Mayuki replied, her voice trembling yet resolute. Their parents had disappeared without a trace a year ago, and the last place they were seen was this very house. They stepped inside, the door closing behind them with a soft thud that seemed to seal their fate. The corridor stretched out before them, dark and foreboding, leading to the heart of the house. Old portraits lined the walls, their eyes following the sublines with an unnerving intensity. Mayuki clutched a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, revealing glimpses of the dilapidated interior. They moved cautiously, each step measured and deliberate. The floorboards groaned under their weight, as if protesting their intrusion. Mayuki's flashlight caught sight of a staircase leading to the second floor, its steps worn and uneven. A shiver ran down her spine as she recalled the stories of strange noises and ghostly apparitions that haunted these halls. "Stay close," John muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. They ascended the stairs, the atmosphere growing colder with each step. At the top, they were greeted by a long hallway, its end obscured by darkness. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, revealing the bare wood beneath. Mayuki paused, her breath visible in the cold air. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. John nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows. There it was again, a faint whispering, like a distant echo of voices long silenced. It seemed to come from the far end of the hall. They continued, drawn towards the source of the sound. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, filling the air with a sense of dread. Mayuki's heart raced as they reached a door, slightly ajar, at the end of the hall. The whispers seemed to emanate from within. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was dark, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. Her flashlight revealed a small, sparsely furnished space. In the center, an old wooden chest sat, covered in dust and cobwebs. The whispers seemed to surround them, echoing off the walls, growing more insistent. John stepped forward, his hand reaching for the chest. "Mayuki, help me with this," he said, his voice steady but tense. Together, they lifted the heavy lid, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. Mayuki's eyes widened as she recognized the faces staring back at her. Their parents, younger and full of life, their smiles frozen in time. She picked up a letter, the paper yellowed with age. As she read, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The letter spoke of a curse, a darkness that had claimed the lives of those who dared to uncover its secrets. Mayuki's hands trembled as she realized the gravity of their situation. "We need to leave now," John said, his voice urgent. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the room. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, screaming in a language they couldn't understand. Panic set in as they tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in on them. Mayuki felt a presence, something malevolent, watching them. She could see it now, a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. "John, we have to find another way out," she cried, her voice barely audible over the din. They moved towards the window, but it was barred from the outside. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. In a moment of desperation, John grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and swung it at the door. The wood splintered, but the door held firm. Mayuki felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder, and she turned to see the shadowy figure looming closer. "We're not alone," she whispered, her voice filled with terror. John swung the candlestick again, and this time the door gave way. They stumbled into the hallway, the whispers still echoing in their ears. They ran, the darkness chasing them, the house seeming to come alive around them. The walls shook, the floorboards buckled, and the air was filled with an otherworldly wail. Mayuki could feel the presence closing in, its cold breath on the back of her neck. They reached the staircase, descending as fast as they could. But as they reached the bottom, the front door swung open on its own. A figure stood in the doorway. A woman with long, flowing hair and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. "You should not have come here," she said, her voice a blend of anger and sorrow. Mayuki and Jun froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The woman stepped forward, her presence filling the room with a palpable sense of dread. "We didn't mean any harm," Mayuki said, her voice shaking. "We just wanted to know what happened to our parents." The woman's expression softened, but her eyes remained cold. "They sought the truth, just as you do," she said. "But some truths are better left buried." The room grew colder, the air heavy with an oppressive silence. Mayuki could feel the weight of the woman's words, the gravity of their situation sinking in. "Please let us go," Jun pleaded, his voice breaking. The woman sighed, a sound filled with centuries of sorrow. "You may leave," she said, "but the house will not let you forget." As she spoke, the front door creaked open wider, revealing the night beyond. Mayuki and Jun didn't hesitate. They ran, the whispers following them, the house seeming to close in on itself as they fled. Outside, the air was cool and fresh, the night sky a blanket of stars. They didn't stop running until they reached the village. Their hearts pounding, their breath ragged, they looked back, the house now a distant silhouette, its dark presence looming over the village. Mayuki knew that they had escaped, but the whispers would haunt them forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within the House of Night Whispers. The village lay in an uneasy silence, the weight of the night's events pressing heavily upon Mayuki and Jun. They sat in their small living room, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with tension, each creak of the house amplifying their already heightened nerves. Mayuki stared at the old photographs they had retrieved from the chest, her mind racing. Their parents had been smiling, their eyes full of life and hope. But now those images felt like a cruel mockery of their current situation. She could still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, like a distant echo that refused to fade. "We can't just leave it like this," Mayuki said, breaking the silence. Jun looked at her, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "What do you mean? We barely made it out alive," he replied, his voice strained. "I know, but there's something we're missing," she insisted. "Something important. Those letters, the photographs, they must mean something." Jun sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, but we need to be careful. That house, it's not normal." Mayuki nodded, her resolve hardening. "We'll go back, but we'll be prepared this time." The next day, they gathered supplies, flashlights, candles, and a few basic tools. They didn't speak much, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what they were about to do hung over them, a silent spectre that refused to be ignored. As night fell, they made their way back to the House of Night Whispers. The village was quiet, its inhabitants still unaware of the darkness that lurked at its edge. The house loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. They entered cautiously, the front door creaking open as if welcoming them back. The air inside was colder than before, and the oppressive silence was almost tangible. Mayuki's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the familiar hallway and its faded portraits. They moved quickly, heading straight for the room at the end of the hall. The whispers began almost immediately, soft and insistent, growing louder with each step. Mayuki felt a chill run down her spine, but she pressed on. In the room, they found the chest just as they had left it. The letters and photographs lay scattered on the floor, as if someone had been through them in their absence. Mayuki picked up another letter, the paper crinkling in her trembling hands. As she read, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The letter spoke of a ritual a way to appease the spirits that haunted the house. Mayuki's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "Jun, look at this," she said, handing him the letter. He read quickly, his expression growing more serious with each word. "So, our parents. They were trying to break the curse," Jun muttered. "But something went wrong." Mayuki nodded, her heart pounding. "We have to finish what they started. It's the only way." They gathered the letters and photographs, piecing together the fragments of the ritual. The instructions were vague, but they managed to decipher enough to form a plan. "We'll need to go to the basement," Mayuki said, her voice barely a whisper. Jun nodded, his face set with determination. "Let's do this." The entrance to the basement was hidden behind a heavy wooden door, its surface covered in strange symbols. Mayuki felt a wave of unease as they opened it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. They made their way down, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was damp and musty, the walls lined with old shelves and forgotten relics. At the center of the room stood an altar, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. "This must be it," Mayuki said, her voice trembling. They placed the letters and photographs on the altar, arranging them according to the instructions they had pieced together. As they lit the candles, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Mayuki felt a cold presence behind her, and she turned to see the shadowy figure from before, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You dare to disturb us again?" The figure hissed its voice, a blend of anger and sorrow. Mayuki's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. "We're here to end this," she said, her voice firm. "We know about the ritual. We're going to finish what our parents started." The figure loomed closer, its form shifting and twisting in the candlelight. "You think you can escape the curse? You are fools." Jun stepped forward, holding the candlestick as a weapon. "We have to try," he said, his voice steady. "Leave us in peace." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the basement. "Peace? There is no peace here. Only darkness." Mayuki and Jun began the ritual, reciting the words they had found in the letters. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening, but they pressed on, determined to see it through. As they spoke the final words, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the spirits were fighting to hold on. Mayuki felt a surge of energy, a cold wind that seemed to emanate from the altar. She could see the shadowy figure writhing, its form dissolving into the darkness. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice fading. "We will always be here." With a final, chilling scream, the figure vanished, the whispers dying down to a faint murmur. The air grew warmer, the oppressive darkness lifting. Mayuki and Jun stood in silence, their hearts pounding, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They had done it. The curse was broken. As they made their way back up the stairs, the house seemed different. Its oppressive atmosphere lifted. The portraits on the walls no longer felt menacing, and the air was clear and fresh. Outside, the night was calm, the stars shining brightly in the sky. They walked back to the village, their steps light, the weight of the curse finally lifted from their shoulders. Back at their home, they sat in the living room, the old photographs and letters spread out before them. Mayuki felt a sense of closure, a peace she hadn't known in a long time. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. Jun nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Yeah, we did." As they looked at the photographs of their parents, they knew that they had finally found the truth. The House of Night Whispers would haunt them no more. The village lay in the embrace of dawn, the first light casting long shadows across the silent streets. Mayuki and Jun had not slept. Their minds were too consumed by the night's harrowing events. The whispers of the house still echoed in their thoughts. Refusing to be silenced, Mayuki sat at the kitchen table, the old letters spread out before her. The faded ink and yellowed paper seemed to hold secrets. She was desperate to understand. Jun entered the room, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. He placed it on the table and sat across from her. His eyes weary but determined. "We need to figure out what happened to our parents," Mayuki said, her voice resolute. "They tried to break the curse. But why? And what went wrong?" John nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of a photograph. "Our parents were always cautious. If they attempted the ritual, they must have been desperate." Mayuki picked up one of the letters, reading the cryptic instructions once more. The ritual was supposed to appease the spirits, but something went wrong. There has to be more to this. As they pored over the documents, a sudden knock on the door startled them. They exchanged a glance, apprehension filling the air. Jun rose and went to the door, opening it cautiously. Standing on the doorstep was an elderly woman, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp and clear. "I am Takako," she introduced herself. "I knew your parents. May I come in?" Mayuki gestured for her to enter, curiosity piqued. Takako sat at the table, her gaze falling on the letters and photographs. "I see you have found some of the truth," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "But there is much you do not know." Mayuki leaned forward, eager for answers. "Please, tell us everything." Takako nodded, taking a deep breath before beginning her tale. "Your parents were not the first to attempt breaking the curse. This house has a dark history, one that stretches back generations." She paused, her eyes distant as she recalled the past. The house was built by a wealthy landowner who dabbled in dark rituals. He sought to gain power by making a pact with malevolent spirits, but the spirits were treacherous, and they cursed the house and all who entered it. Mayuki felt a chill run down her spine. "So the whispers, they are the voices of those spirits?" Takako nodded solemnly. "Yes, the spirits are bound to the house, trapped in their own torment. They seek to draw others into their suffering." Jun frowned, his mind racing. "Our parents tried to free them. But why? What drove them to take such a risk?" Takako sighed. "Your mother discovered the curse while researching the history of the village. She believed that by breaking the curse, she could end the suffering of the spirits and bring peace to the village." Mayuki's heart ached at the thought of her mother's bravery. "But something went wrong," she said softly. Takako nodded. "Yes, the ritual requires great precision and strength of will. Any mistake can have dire consequences. Your parents were close, but the spirits resisted. They are desperate to hold on to the only existence they know." Jun looked at Takako, a question burning in his eyes. "Can the curse still be broken? Can we finish what our parents started?" Takako's eyes were filled with both sorrow and hope. "It is possible, but it will not be easy. The ritual must be completed, and the spirits must be convinced to move on. It will require courage, determination, and a deep understanding of the spirit's torment." Mayuki and Jun exchanged a glance, their resolve hardening. "We will do it," Mayuki said firmly. "For our parents and for the village." Takako nodded, a small smile on her lips. "Very well. I will help you. Together, we will end this." The day passed in a blur of preparations. Takako guided them through the steps of the ritual, explaining the significance of each element. They gathered the necessary items: candles, incense, and a ceremonial dagger that had been passed down through generations. As night fell, they made their way back to the House of Night Whispers. The village was eerily quiet, the air thick with anticipation. They entered the house, the familiar chills seeping into their bones. The whispers began almost immediately, a low murmur that filled the darkened halls. Takako led them to the basement where the altar stood waiting. They arranged the candles and incense, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. Mayuki and Jun took their places beside the altar, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Takako began the ritual, her voice steady and clear. As she chanted the ancient words, the air grew colder, the shadows deepening. But they pressed on, determined to see it through. As Takako's chant grew louder, the whispers intensified, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Mayuki felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder. and she turned to see the shadowy figure looming behind her. "You think you can escape us?" the figure hissed, its voice filled with malice. Mayuki's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "We're here to end this," she said, her voice firm. "You will find peace." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the basement. "Peace? There is no peace for us. Only darkness." Takako's chant reached a crescendo, and the candles flared brighter. The shadowy figure writhed its form, twisting and contorting in the flickering light. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice fading. "We will always be here." With a final, chilling scream, the figure vanished, the whispers dying down to a faint murmur. The air grew warmer, the oppressive darkness lifting. Mayuki and Jun stood in silence, their hearts pounding, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They had done it. The curse was broken. Takako smiled, a look of relief on her face. "You have done well," she said softly. "The spirits are free." Mayuki felt a sense of closure, a peace she hadn't known in a long time. As they made their way back up the stairs, the house seemed different. Its oppressive atmosphere lifted. The portraits on the walls no longer felt menacing, and the air was clear and fresh. Outside, the night was calm, the stars shining brightly in the sky. They walked back to the village, their steps light, the weight of the curse finally lifted from their shoulders. Back at their home, they sat in the living room, the old photographs and letters spread out before them. Mayuki felt a sense of closure, a peace she hadn't known in a long time. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. Jun nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Yeah, we did." As they looked at the photographs of their parents, they knew that they had finally found the truth. The House of Night Whispers would haunt them no more. However, a lingering unease settled in Mayuki's mind. Though they had broken the curse, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Takako's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Mayuki saw a flicker of concern. "Takako," Mayuki began cautiously, "is there something else we should know?" The elderly woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "The curse is broken, but the spirits are not entirely at peace. There is one final step to ensure their complete release." Jun frowned. "What do we need to do?" Takako's gaze was steady, her voice a calm but urgent whisper. "We must perform a cleansing ritual at dawn at the place where the pact was made. Only then will the spirits be truly free." Mayuki felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "Where is this place?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Takako's eyes darkened with memory. "It is an old shrine, hidden deep within the forest. Few know of its existence." Jun stood, determination etched on his face. "Then we go at dawn." As they prepared for this final task, a sense of foreboding settled over them. The night passed slowly, each minute stretching into an eternity. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they set out for the shrine. The forest was dense and dark, the path barely visible in the dim light. Takako led the way, her steps sure and unerring. Mayuki and Jun followed closely, their nerves taut with anticipation. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center stood an ancient shrine, its stones weathered by time. Takako began the cleansing ritual, her voice a low murmur as she chanted the sacred words. The air grew heavy with a palpable tension, the forest around them seeming to hold its breath. Mayuki and Jun watched, their hearts pounding in unison. As Takako's chant reached its peak, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, scattering leaves and dust. The ground trembled, and a low rumble echoed through the forest. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the wind died down, and a profound silence fell over the shrine. Takako turned to them, her face serene. "It is done. The spirits are free." Mayuki felt a wave of relief wash over her, the last remnants of fear dissipating. Jun nodded, a smile of gratitude on his lips. "Thank you, Takako." The elderly woman inclined her head, her eyes shining with a gentle light. "Your parents would be proud of you both." As they made their way back to the village, the first rays of the sun bathed the forest in a golden glow. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mayuki felt a true sense of peace. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their bond stronger than ever. And though the House of Night Whispers would remain a part of their history, it no longer held any power over them. They were free, and the future lay open before them, filled with endless possibilities. The dawn light filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting a soft, golden glow on the forest floor. Mayuki, Jun, and Takako moved with quiet determination, the weight of their task heavy on their shoulders. They had reached the ancient shrine where the final act of the ritual would take place, a place shrouded in history and mystery. The shrine stood in a small clearing, its stone structure covered in moss and ivy, giving it an otherworldly appearance. The air was still, filled with an eerie silence that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. Mayuki's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the urgency of their mission. Takako began preparing the altar, her movements precise and deliberate. She placed the ceremonial dagger in the center. Surrounded by the candles and incense they had brought, the sun's rays gradually grew stronger, illuminating the scene with a soft, ethereal light. Mayuki and Jun took their positions, their eyes locked on Takako as she began to chant. The ancient words flowed from her lips, filling the air with a sense of solemnity and purpose. The temperature dropped suddenly, a chill settling over the clearing. As the chant continued, a low rumble began to emanate from the ground. The stones of the shrine seemed to vibrate, resonating with the power of Takako's words. Mayuki felt a cold breeze brush against her skin, bringing with it the faint whispers of the spirits they sought to release. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing, figures began to emerge. Ghostly apparitions, their forms, translucent and flickering, moved towards the shrine, their eyes, filled with sorrow and longing, fixed on the altar. Where Takako continued her chant, Jun's grip tightened on the handle of the ceremonial dagger. He could feel the presence of the spirits, their pain and anger palpable in the air. He knew that they were close to the climax of the ritual, the moment when the spirits would be free or consumed by their torment. Suddenly, the leading spirit, a tall figure with hollow eyes, stepped forward. Its voice, a haunting whisper, echoed through the clearing. "Why do you seek to disturb us again? Have you not learned?" Mayuki stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We seek to free you, to end your suffering. We want to complete the ritual and bring peace to your souls." The spirit's eyes bore into hers, as if searching for the truth in her words. "For centuries, we have been trapped, bound to this place by a curse we did not choose. Can you truly end our torment?" Takako's chant grew louder, more insistent. The spirits around the clearing began to wail, their cries, a mixture of hope and despair. The ground shook violently, the stones of the shrine cracking under the strain of the ritual's power. Jun stepped closer to the altar, raising the dagger high above his head. "We will finish what our parents started. We will set you free," he declared, his voice resolute. With a swift motion, he brought the dagger down, plunging it into the heart of the altar. A blinding light erupted from the point of contact, engulfing the clearing in a brilliant glow. The spirits screamed, their forms writhing in the intense light. Mayuki shielded her eyes, the brightness overwhelming her senses. She could feel the power of the ritual coursing through her, a force both terrifying and awe-inspiring. As the light began to fade, she opened her eyes to see the spirits slowly dissolving, their anguished expressions giving way to relief. The tall spirit turned to her one last time, its voice a gentle whisper. "Thank you," it said before vanishing into the light. The clearing fell silent, the air still and calm once more. Mayuki, Jun, and Takako stood in the aftermath, their bodies exhausted but their hearts light. The spirits were gone, their torment finally ended. They began to make their way back to the village, the weight of their task lifting with each step. The forest, once filled with an oppressive darkness, now felt alive and vibrant. Birds sang in the trees, and the scent of fresh earth filled the air. Back in the village, the residents greeted them with a mix of curiosity and relief. Word had spread quickly, and the villagers gathered to hear their story. Mayuki and Jun recounted their journey, the challenges they face, and the ultimate success of the ritual. As they spoke, Takako watched with a serene smile. She knew that the village would be at peace now, the curse lifted, and the spirits set free. Mayuki and Jun had proven their courage and determination, and their parents' legacy would live on. That night, the village celebrated, the air filled with laughter and joy. Mayuki and Jun sat together, watching the festivities with a sense of fulfillment. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their bond stronger than ever. "Do you think the spirits have found peace?" Mayuki asked, her voice soft. Jun nodded, a gentle smile on his lips. "I believe they have, and I believe we have too." As the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the village, Mayuki felt a profound sense of closure. The House of Night Whispers was no longer a place of fear and sorrow. It was a part of their history, a story of courage and redemption. In the days that followed, life in the village returned to normal. The house at the end of the hall remained standing, but it no longer held the same dark presence. It was a reminder of the past, but also a symbol of the strength and resilience of those who had faced its horrors. Mayuki and Jun continued to live in the village, their bond unbroken by the trials they had faced. They knew that they had done something truly remarkable, something that would be remembered for generations. As the seasons changed and the years passed, the story of the House of Night Whispers became a legend, told and retold by the villagers. But for Mayuki and Jun, it was more than just a story. It was a testament to their love, their courage, and their unwavering determination to find the truth and bring peace to the souls of the lost. And so, as the sun set over the village, casting long shadows on the quiet streets, Mayuki and Jun stood together, knowing that they had faced the darkness and emerged into the light. The whispers had been silenced, and the house was finally at peace. The old house stood silently at the edge of the village, a relic of a bygone era. Its weathered wooden exterior, covered in a thick layer of moss, seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. The air around it was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a constant reminder of the passage of time. A narrow path, barely visible through the overgrown foliage, led to the front door, which hung slightly askew on rusted hinges. The house had been abandoned for decades, its history shrouded in mystery and whispers of tragedy. No one in the village dared to venture near, especially after sundown. The few who had claimed to hear strange noises coming from within, a low, mournful wailing that sent shivers down their spines. It was said that the house was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had once lived there. Two friends, Yuki and Taro, both in their early 30s, were inexplicably drawn to the house. They had known each other since childhood and shared a fascination with the supernatural. Their curiosity had led them to explore numerous abandoned places, but none had affected them as deeply as this house. Yuki was a writer, always in search of new material for her stories. Her dark, shoulder-length hair framed a face that was both delicate and determined. Taro, on the other hand, was a photographer, his camera always slung over his shoulder. He had a tall, lean frame and a calm demeanor that often belied his intense curiosity. One crisp autumn afternoon, the two friends stood at the edge of the path, gazing up at the house. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the ground. "We should go in before it gets too dark," Yuki suggested, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Taro nodded, adjusting the strap of his camera. "Let's get this over with. Maybe we'll finally uncover the truth about this place." As they approached the front door, a chill wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves and making the house seem almost alive. Yuki pushed the door open, its creak echoing through the silent halls. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from the dusty windows that filtered the dying sunlight. They stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rot, and an unsettling silence enveloped them. The foyer was cluttered with remnants of the past, old furniture covered in sheets, broken picture frames, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, their breath visible in the cold, damp air. "Let's start with the main floor," Taro suggested, raising his camera to capture the decaying grandeur of the house. They moved cautiously through the rooms, each one more decrepit than the last. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floors were littered with debris. In the living room, they found an old piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. Yuki ran her fingers over them, a discordant note echoing through the room. "It's like time stopped here," she murmured, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of what had happened. Taro nodded, snapping photos of the eerie scene. After exploring the main floor, they decided to head to the basement. The entrance was a narrow door at the end of a dark hallway, partially obscured by a fallen bookshelf. They managed to move it aside, revealing a steep staircase leading down into the darkness. A musty, almost oppressive smell wafted up from below, making Yuki wrinkle her nose in distaste. "Ready?" Taro asked, his voice low. Yuki nodded, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Let's go." The stairs creaked ominously as they descended, each step echoing in the confined space. The basement was even darker than the rest of the house, the only light coming from their flashlights. The air was colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over them like a heavy blanket. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a large, open space filled with old furniture boxes and other forgotten items. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the walls were damp with moisture. They moved slowly, their flashlights sweeping over the clutter. Yuki stopped suddenly, her light catching something unusual on the far wall. "Taro, look at this," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Taro joined her, his flashlight revealing a large, old mirror mounted on the wall. Its surface was covered in dust and grime, but there was something unsettling about it. Why would someone put a mirror down here? He wondered aloud, reaching out to wipe away the dirt. As he did, a chill ran down his spine, and he pulled his hand back as if burned. "Did you feel that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Yuki nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "It's like there's something behind it." They both stared at the mirror, their reflections distorted and ghostly in the dim light. Suddenly, the mirror seemed to shimmer, and a faint, almost imperceptible movement caught their attention. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, seemed to shift behind the glass. Yuki gasped, stepping back instinctively. "What is that?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Taro shook his head, unable to tear his eyes away from the mirror. "I don't know, but we need to find out." He reached into his bag, pulling out a small crowbar. "We should see if we can move it," he suggested, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at his insides. Yuki nodded, her grip on the flashlight tightening. Together, they began to pry the mirror from the wall, the ancient nails giving way with a series of sharp, metallic creaks. As the mirror came loose, a cold, malevolent energy seemed to seep from the wall behind it, chilling them to the bone. The mirror clattered to the floor, revealing a hidden alcove behind it. Inside the alcove was a small wooden door, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, their curiosity battling with their growing sense of dread. "Should we open it?" Yuki asked, her voice barely audible. Taro hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, we have to. We need to know what's behind this." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he grasped the door handle. It was cold to the touch, and a sense of unease washed over him. With a deep breath, he turned the handle and pulled the door open. A rush of icy air greeted them, and they peered into the darkness beyond. The small room was empty, save for a single, old chest in the center. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, its metal fittings tarnished with age. "Let's see what's inside," Yuki suggested, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. They approached the chest cautiously, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Taro knelt down, his hands shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside, they found a collection of old documents, photographs, and personal items, all neatly arranged as if someone had placed them there with great care. Yuki picked up one of the photographs, her eyes widening in shock. "Taro, look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Taro glanced at the photo, his blood running cold. It was a picture of the house, taken many years ago. In the foreground stood a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. But what caught their attention was the figure standing in the background, almost hidden in the shadows. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes, its presence sending a shiver down their spines. "Who's that?" Taro asked, his voice filled with dread. Yuki shook her head, her eyes fixed on the photograph. "I don't know, but I think we've found the source of the haunting." They continued to sift through the contents of the chest, uncovering more photographs, letters, and personal items. Each piece seemed to add to the growing sense of unease that filled the room. As they pieced together the story of the family who had once lived in the house, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The family had moved to the house in the early 1900s, hoping to start a new life away from the bustling city. But from the very beginning, strange things had begun to happen. Objects would move on their own, strange noises echoed through the halls, and the children claimed to see a dark figure lurking in the shadows. Despite their best efforts to ignore the disturbances, the family's fear grew with each passing day. The father, a stern and practical man, refused to believe in the supernatural. He insisted that there was a logical explanation for everything. But as the weeks turned into months, his skepticism began to waver. The final entry in the father's journal, found at the bottom of the chest, detailed the family's last, desperate attempt to escape the house. They had packed their belongings and were preparing to leave, when the dark figure appeared, blocking their path. The journal ended abruptly, the last words scrawled in a shaky hand. "It won't let us leave." Yuki and Taro stared at the journal, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to get out of here," Taro said, his voice trembling. Yuki nodded, her fear mirrored in his eyes. "Yes, before it's too late." They hurried back up the stairs, their flashlights casting frantic beams of light in the darkness. As they reached the top, they heard a low, guttural growl coming from the basement. They didn't stop to look back, rushing out of the house and into the safety of the daylight. As they stood outside, catching their breath, they glanced back at the house, its dark windows seeming to watch them. "We need to tell someone about this," Yuki said, her voice shaky. Taro nodded, his face pale. "Yes, but who would believe us?" They knew that they had uncovered something truly terrifying, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they walked away from the house, the sun dipping below the horizon, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The house, with its dark secrets and malevolent presence, would always be a part of their lives, a reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Yuki and Taro had spent the night restless and haunted by their experiences in the old house. The photographs and journal entries they had discovered weighed heavily on their minds, their sleep plagued by nightmares of the dark figure. By morning, they knew they had to return to the house, to uncover more of its secrets. The sunlight did little to dispel the sense of dread that had settled over them. They met at a small cafe in the village to discuss their plan. The other patrons cast curious glances at them, their hushed conversations, a stark contrast to the intensity of Yuki and Taro's discussion. "We need to find out more about the family that lived there," Yuki said, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped her coffee. Taro nodded, his eyes dark with determination. "I agree. There must be records or someone who remembers them." They decided to visit the village library first, hoping to find old newspapers or documents that might shed light on the house's history. The library was a quaint old building, its shelves filled with dusty tomes and yellowed papers. The librarian, a kind elderly woman, greeted them with a warm smile. "We're looking for information about the old house on the edge of the village," Yuki explained. The librarian's smile faltered slightly, and a shadow passed over her face. "That house has a dark history," she said quietly. "But if you're determined, I can show you where to look." She led them to a back room filled with old newspapers and records. "These go back decades," she explained. "You might find what you're looking for here." Yuki and Taro spent hours poring over the old documents, their fingers growing black with ink and dust. Finally, they found a series of articles that detailed the tragic history of the family who had lived in the house. The family, named Tanaka, had moved to the village in the early 1900s. Mr. Tanaka had been a successful businessman in Tokyo, but after a series of personal tragedies, he had decided to move his family to the countryside for a fresh start. From the beginning, the family had experienced strange occurrences in the house. The villagers had whispered about it, but Mr. Tanaka had dismissed their superstitions. As the years went by, the strange events escalated. Objects moved on their own, eerie sounds echoed through the halls, and the children spoke of seeing a dark figure in the shadows. The articles detailed the family's growing desperation and their unsuccessful attempts to leave the house. The final article was a brief, chilling account of the family's disappearance. One night, they had vanished without a trace, leaving the house abandoned. The villagers believed the house was cursed, and no one had dared to live there since. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, the weight of the history pressing down on them. "We need to go back," Yuki said quietly. "We need to find out what happened to them." Taro nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Yes, we can't leave this unresolved." They returned to the house as the sun was beginning to set, the shadows lengthening and deepening around them. The house seemed to loom larger, its presence more oppressive than before. With a deep breath, they stepped inside, the air immediately colder and more stifling. They made their way back to the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The small room with the chest seemed even more ominous in the fading light. They knelt by the chest, their breath visible in the cold air. "We missed something," Taro said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There must be more here." They carefully examined the chest and the alcove, looking for any hidden compartments or clues. As they worked, a low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, freezing them in place. Yuki's heart pounded in her chest, and she glanced at Taro, his face pale with fear. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Taro shook his head, his eyes wide. "I don't know, but we need to be careful." They continued their search, the sense of dread growing with each passing moment. Finally, Yuki found a loose floorboard near the chest. She pried it up, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was an old, leather-bound book. Yuki carefully lifted it out, her hands shaking. "This must be important," she said, opening the book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, drawings, and diagrams. It seemed to be a journal, but not like the one they had found before. This one appeared to be a record of the strange occurrences and attempts to understand and counteract the dark presence in the house. As they read through the journal, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The Tanaka family had realized too late that the house was haunted by a malevolent spirit. The journal detailed their desperate attempts to rid the house of the entity, including various rituals and protective measures. None of them had worked, and the family's fear had grown with each passing day. The final entries were the most chilling. They described the increasing aggression of the entity and the family's realization that they were trapped. The last entry was a desperate plea for help. The words scrawled in a shaky hand, "It won't let us leave. We are prisoners in our own home." Yuki and Taro sat in stunned silence, the weight of the journal's contents pressing down on them. "We need to do something," Yuki said finally, her voice shaking. We can't just leave it like this. Taro nodded, his face set with determination. We need to find a way to free the house from this entity. They spent the next few hours carefully studying the journal, trying to understand the rituals and protective measures described within. It was clear that the entity was powerful and malevolent, and that they would need to be careful. As they prepared to leave the basement, the low growl echoed through the room again, louder and more menacing this time. They froze, their flashlights flickering as a cold wind swept through the basement. The dark figure appeared in the doorway, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Yuki and Taro backed away slowly, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to get out of here," Yuki whispered, her voice trembling. Taro nodded, his eyes fixed on the figure. "Let's go now." They hurried up the stairs, the figure following them, its presence growing more oppressive with each step. As they reached the top, they slammed the door shut, their breath coming in ragged gasps. "We can't stay here," Taro said, his voice shaking. "We need to find someone who can help us." Yuki nodded, her face pale with fear. "Yes, but who?" They knew that they needed to find someone with knowledge of the supernatural, someone who could help them understand and defeat the entity. As they left the house, the dark figure watched them from the window, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They had uncovered the house's dark history, but they knew that their journey was far from over. The entity was powerful, and they would need all the help they could get to free the house from its grasp. The village was quiet as they walked through the streets, the houses dark and silent. Yuki and Taro knew that they were racing against time, and that they would need to find help quickly. This search for answers had led them to the edge of terror, and they knew that the worst was yet to come. The following morning, Yuki and Taro awoke with a sense of urgency. The haunting presence of the entity from the house lingered in their minds. They knew they needed help, and their first stop was the home of an elderly woman named Keiko. Renowned in the village for her knowledge of the supernatural, Keiko's house was a small, traditional Japanese home, nestled among ancient cherry blossom trees. As they approached, the soft scent of the blossoms filled the air, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the haunted house. Keiko greeted them at the door, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "I knew you would come," she said softly, her voice a soothing balm to their frazzled nerves. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance before stepping inside. Keiko led them to a small, cozy room, filled with the scent of incense and the soft glow of candlelight. They sat around a low table, and Keiko poured tea for them, her movements graceful and deliberate. After a moment of silence, Yuki spoke. "We need your help, Keiko-san. The house on the edge of the village. It's haunted, and we don't know how to deal with it." Keiko nodded, her expression serious. "I have heard of that house. It is said to be cursed by a powerful spirit. Tell me everything you know." Yuki and Taro recounted their experiences in the house, the eerie occurrences, and the dark figure that had followed them. They showed her the photographs and the journals they had found, and Keiko listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the information. When they finished, she sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before speaking. "The spirit you encountered is indeed powerful. It is not just a ghost, but an ornery, a vengeful spirit. It is tied to that place by a deep and terrible anger. If you are to rid the house of this spirit, you must first understand its pain and suffering." Yuki and Taro listened intently, the gravity of Keiko's words sinking in. "How do we do that?" Taro asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Keiko looked at them with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "We must perform a ritual to communicate with the spirit. Only then can we understand its torment and find a way to appease it." She stood and moved to a small shrine in the corner of the room, retrieving a set of ancient scrolls and ritual tools. "This will not be easy," she warned, "and it will be dangerous, but it is the only way." Yuki and Taro nodded, their determination unwavering. They had come this far, and they were not about to turn back now. As the sun began to set, they prepared for the ritual. Keiko instructed them on what to do, explaining each step with meticulous detail. They gathered the necessary items: candles, incense, sacred talismans, and a small, ornate mirror. Keiko led them to the house under the cover of darkness. The air growing colder with each step, the house loomed before them, its dark windows like empty eyes watching their approach. Inside, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before, the air thick with a malevolent energy. They set up the ritual space in the main room, placing the candles and incense in a circle around them. Keiko began to chant softly, her voice a soothing counterpoint to the growing sense of dread. Yuki and Taro held the mirror between them, their reflections wavering in the candlelight. As the chant grew louder, the air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. The dark figure appeared, its glowing eyes fixed on them with a malevolent intensity. Keiko's chant reached a crescendo, and the figure seemed to waver, its form flickering in and out of existence. Yuki and Taro tightened their grip on the mirror, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We are here to help you," Keiko called out, her voice strong and steady. "Show us your pain, so we may understand and free you from your torment." The figure hesitated, then began to shift and change. The room around them seemed to melt away, replaced by a vision of the past. They found themselves standing in the same house, but it was no longer decayed and abandoned. It was alive with the sights and sounds of a family. They saw Mr. Tanaka, a stern yet kind-looking man, and his wife, a gentle woman with a warm smile. Their 2 children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. But there was something else, a shadow lurking at the edges of the vision, growing darker and more menacing with each passing moment. The family's happiness was tinged with fear, their joy overshadowed by an unspoken dread. The vision shifted, showing them the family's descent into terror. They saw the strange occurrences that had plagued the house, the objects moving on their own, the eerie sounds, and the dark figure that appeared in the shadows. The family's fear grew, their once happy home, becoming a place of horror and despair. The vision culminated in their family's desperate attempt to escape, the dark figure blocking their path. They watched in horror as the family was trapped, their pleas for help echoing through the house. The vision faded, leaving Yuki, Taro, and Keiko standing in the cold, dark room once more. The dark figure remained, but its malevolence had shifted to a deep, abiding sorrow. "You were wronged," Keiko said softly, her voice filled with compassion. "We understand your pain. We are here to help you find peace." The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering as if caught between 2 worlds. Keiko stepped forward, holding out a sacred talisman. "Release your anger. Find the peace you deserve." The figure reached out, its dark hand closing around the talisman. There was a blinding flash of light, and the room was filled with a warm, soothing energy. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Yuki and Taro breathed a sigh of relief, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. "Is it over?" Yuki asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keiko nodded, her face pale but calm. "Yes, the spirit has found peace. The house is no longer cursed." They left the house, the night air cool and refreshing. As they walked back to the village, they felt a sense of closure and relief. The entity that had haunted the house for so long was finally at rest. Back at Keiko's home, they thanked her profusely for her help. "We couldn't have done it without you," Taro said, his voice filled with gratitude. Keiko smiled, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. The spirits of the past are powerful, but with understanding and compassion. Even the deepest wounds can be healed. Yuki and Taro returned to their homes, their minds filled with the events of the past days. They knew they had been part of something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. As they lay in their beds that night, they felt a sense of peace, knowing that the house and the spirit within it were finally at rest, the village returned to its quiet routine, the whispers of the haunted house fading into memory. But Yuki and Taro knew that they would never forget what they had experienced. The house, once a place of fear and despair, had been transformed into a symbol of hope and redemption. And as they moved forward, they carried with them the lessons they had learned, the knowledge that even the darkest of spirits could find peace in the light of understanding and compassion. The village was quiet, but the events of the past days weighed heavily on Yuki and Taro. Although the malevolent spirit had found peace, the sense of closure they had hoped for eluded them. They felt a lingering unease, as if the house still held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The morning after the ritual, Yuki awoke with a start. She had dreamed of the house again, but this time it was different. In her dream, she had seen a small, hidden room beneath the basement, a place they had not yet explored. The memory of the dream was vivid, the details sharp and clear in her mind. She knew she had to go back. Taro shared her resolve. Despite their exhaustion, they decided to return to the house one last time. The journey back to the house was silent, the weight of their task pressing down on them. The house stood as they had left it, but its presence seemed different, almost expectant. They made their way to the basement, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The small room where they had found the chest seemed even more oppressive, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. Yuki led Taro to the spot she had seen in her dream, a small area near the far wall. She knelt down, her hands trembling as she felt along the floorboards. There, hidden beneath a layer of dust and debris, was a small, concealed trapdoor. Her heart pounded as she pried it open, revealing a narrow, dark passage leading deeper underground. "We have to go down," Yuki said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Taro nodded, his face pale but determined. "Let's finish this." They descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The passage was narrow, the walls close and suffocating. Their flashlights revealed old, crumbling bricks and the occasional scurrying of small creatures. The passage opened into a small, hidden chamber, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. In the center of the chamber was a small altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. On the altar lay an old, worn book and a small, ornate box. Yuki approached the altar, her flashlight illuminating the ancient symbols carved into the stone. She opened the book, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. It was a diary, written by a woman named Akiko Tanaka, the wife of the family they had seen in the vision. The diary detailed the family's descent into terror, but it also revealed something they had not known. Akiko had discovered that the spirit haunting the house was not just a vengeful entity, but the spirit of her own husband. Twisted and corrupted by anger and pain, he had been consumed by the dark energy of the house, becoming a malevolent force that tormented his own family. Akiko had tried to save him, to perform a ritual to free his spirit, but she had failed. Her last entry was a desperate plea for forgiveness, her final words, a heartbreaking farewell to her children. Yuki and Taro exchanged a glance, the weight of Akiko's words pressing down on them. "We need to finish what she started," Taro said, his voice filled with determination. Yuki nodded, her resolve firm. "We need to free his spirit, once and for all." They examined the altar and the box, finding the items necessary to perform the ritual. Keiko had taught them well, and they knew what they had to do. They began the ritual, their voices steady as they chanted the ancient words. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy, the temperature dropping sharply. As they continued the chant, the chamber filled with a blinding light. The dark figure of Mr. Tanaka appeared before them, his eyes glowing with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "We are here to help you," Yuki said, her voice strong and steady. "We understand your pain. Let us free you from your torment." The figure hesitated, then began to waver, its form flickering in the light. With a final, powerful chant, Yuki and Taro completed the ritual. The figure let out a low, mournful wail, then began to dissolve, the dark energy dissipating into the light. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Yuki and Taro stood in the quiet, their hearts pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," Taro said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yuki nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, it's finally over." They made their way back up the passage. The weight of their task lifted from their shoulders. As they emerged into the basement, the house seemed different, its dark presence gone. The air was lighter, the oppressive energy dissipated. They left the house for the last time, the morning light, casting long shadows as they walked away. Back in the village, they were greeted with a mixture of curiosity and relief. The villagers had sensed the change, the lifting of the dark energy that had plagued their house for so long. Keiko welcomed them back with a warm smile, her eyes filled with pride. "You have done well," she said, her voice gentle. "The spirit is at peace, and the house is free." Yuki and Taro thanked her, their hearts filled with gratitude. They knew they had been part of something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. The house, once a place of fear and despair, had been transformed into a symbol of hope and redemption. As they moved forward, they carried with them the lessons they had learned, the knowledge that even the darkest of spirits could find peace in the light of understanding and compassion. The village returned to its quiet routine, the whispers of the haunted house fading into memory, but Yuki and Taro knew that they would never forget what they had experienced. Their bond had been forged in the fires of fear and determination, and they emerged stronger, their spirits unbroken. The old house stood silent once more, its secrets revealed and its spirits at rest. The cherry blossoms swayed gently in the breeze, a promise of renewal and peace. Yuki and Taro stood together, their hands intertwined, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, knowing that they had the strength to overcome them. The past had been laid to rest, and with it, a new dawn had risen. The house and the spirits within would remain a part of their story, a testament to the power of compassion, understanding, and the unbreakable bond of friendship. The autumn wind rustled through the ancient trees surrounding the old family home, its creaking branches whispering tales of bygone eras. The sky, a tapestry of twilight hues, cast long shadows over the moss-covered stones, lining the pathway to the entrance. The house stood tall and imposing, its weathered fade and shuttered windows, giving an air of abandonment, yet an inexplicable aura of watchfulness. Yamamoto Kenta, a man in his early 40s, stood at the gate, his breath visible in the crisp evening air. He had not set foot in his ancestral home for over 2 decades, ever since his family had left abruptly one fateful night. Now, as he gazed upon the house, memories of a childhood shrouded in mystery and whispered secrets came flooding back. Beside him, his wife, Eiko, clutched her coat tighter, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and unease. They had returned to this place at Kenta's insistence, driven by a letter from his late mother that had arrived only weeks after her passing. "Come back to the house," the letter had urged. "There are things you need to understand." The letter, penned in his mother's delicate handwriting, was cryptic yet compelling, leaving Kenta with no choice but to heed her final wish. As they walked up the stone path, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet seemed to echo louder than it should have, a prelude to the eerie silence that awaited them inside. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway filled with the scent of age and decay. Cobwebs adorned the corners, and dust motes danced in the faint light, filtering through the narrow windows. They stepped inside, the door closing behind them with a soft thud that resonated through the empty halls. Kenta led Eiko through the familiar, yet hauntingly altered space, each room a fragment of his fragmented memories. The living room, with its grand fireplace and antique furniture, seemed frozen in time, a stark contrast to the modern world outside. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seemingly following the couple as they moved. Aiko shivered, feeling a chill that was not entirely due to the cold. "Kenta, are you sure about this?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded, though he felt the same trepidation. "I need to understand what happened here, Aiko. I need to know why we left so suddenly." The study was their final destination, a room his father had forbidden him to enter as a child. The door, unlike the others, was locked, but Kenta retrieved an old, ornate key from his pocket, its brass surface worn smooth by time. As the key turned and the door swung open, the musty smell of old books and parchment enveloped them. Shelves lined the walls, filled with volumes of forgotten law and journals that chronicled the family's history. At the center of the room stood a large mahogany desk, its surface cluttered with papers and an open journal. Kenta approached the desk, his heart pounding in his chest. The journal, its pages yellowed with age, bore his father's meticulous handwriting. He began to read, the words revealing a tale of dark secrets and hidden curses that had plagued his family for generations. The journal spoke of a curse, a malevolent force that had taken root in their home centuries ago. Passed down from one generation to the next, it described strange occurrences, unexplained illnesses, and untimely deaths that had befallen family members. The more he read, the more Kenta understood the urgency in his mother's letter. The curse was real, and it had not been vanquished. Aiko, peering over his shoulder, gasped as she read the words. "We need to leave, Kenta. This place is dangerous." But Kenta shook his head, determination replacing his fear. "No, we need to understand it. We need to find a way to end it, once and for all." As they delved deeper into the journal, a sense of dread settled over them. The final entry, dated the night they had left, detailed a ritual that his parents had attempted, a desperate bid to break the curse. It had failed, and in the aftermath, they had fled, hoping to protect Kenta from the darkness that loomed over their home. Now, it was up to him to finish what they had started. As night fell and the house creaked and groaned around them, Kenta and Aiko prepared to face the malevolent force that had haunted his family for generations. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they were determined to uncover the truth and put an end to the curse of the family home. Their resolve was tested as strange occurrences began to unfold, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dark, and the sensation of unseen eyes watching their every move. Kenta discovered an old map hidden within the journal, detailing the layout of the house and marking a hidden chamber beneath the basement. Believing this to be the source of the curse, he and Aiko descended into the depths of the house, armed with little more than their courage and the hope of breaking the cycle of suffering. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and shadowy corners, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. At the end of the main passage, they found a hidden door concealed behind a stack of old crates. With a deep breath, Kenta pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and in the center of the room stood an altar adorned with strange symbols and ancient artifacts. A sense of malevolence emanated from the altar, and Aiko clutched Kenta's arm, her fear palpable. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. They approached the altar, and as they did, the symbols began to glow with an eerie light. The room grew colder, and a shadowy figure materialized before them, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The entity spoke in a language they did not understand, its voice a low, guttural growl that sent chills down their spines. Kenta held the journal aloft, reciting the incantations his father had transcribed in a desperate bid to banish the entity. As he spoke, the room trembled and the figure's form wavered. Aiko joined him, her voice steady, despite her fear, and together they chanted the ancient words, their resolve unwavering. The entity let out a deafening roar, and the light from the symbols intensified, filling the room with a blinding radiance. When the light faded, the figure was gone, and the oppressive weight of the curse seemed to lift. Exhausted but relieved, Kenta and Aiko collapsed to the floor, their ordeal finally over. As they made their way back to the surface, the house felt different, its dark aura dissipated. The family home, once a place of dread and sorrow, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Kenta knew that their journey was not yet over, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of hope. Together, they would rebuild the family home, turning it into a place of light and warmth, free from the shadows of the past. And as they stood in the morning light, watching the first rays of dawn illuminate the old house, they knew that the curse had been broken and their family's legacy had been reclaimed. The first rays of dawn barely penetrated the dense canopy of trees surrounding the old Yamamoto family home. The morning mist clung to the ground, curling around the gnarled roots and stone steps leading to the entrance. As the sun began to rise, the house stood in stark relief against the soft glow of the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like grasping fingers. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a sense of unease. The previous night's encounter with the malevolent entity had left Kenta and Aiko exhausted, but their determination to uncover the truth remained unshaken. The family home, now free from the immediate grip of the curse, still held many secrets, and they knew their journey was far from over. Kenta and Aiko gathered in the kitchen, the room's once familiar comfort, now tinged with a sense of foreboding. They shared a silent breakfast, their thoughts preoccupied with the hidden chamber they had discovered. The journal's final pages had hinted at more than just a single ritual. There were clues to a deeper mystery, one that had been buried for generations. "We need to go back down there," Kenta said, breaking the silence. Aiko nodded, her eyes reflecting the same steely resolve. "We have to understand what truly happened and ensure it doesn't happen again." The basement, now illuminated by portable lamps, revealed its secrets reluctantly. The hidden chamber, with its eerie symbols and oppressive air, felt like a place out of time, a relic of dark rituals and desperate measures. Kenta and Aiko carefully examined the altar, searching for any clues that might explain the curse's origin. Behind the altar, they found a loose stone in the wall. Kenta pried it open, revealing a small, dusty compartment. Inside lay a bundle of old letters and a leather-bound book, its cover marked with the same strange symbols as the altar. Kenta opened the book, its brittle pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches. It was a journal, not unlike his father's, but much older. The entries were written in archaic Japanese, detailing the lives of the Yamamoto ancestors and their dealings with the supernatural. One particular entry stood out. It spoke of a pact made with a dark entity, a desperate attempt to save the family from ruin during a period of famine and war. The terms of the pact were vague, but it was clear that the price paid had been a deeper curse that would plague the family for generations. As Kenta read aloud, Aiko's face grew pale. "This is the source of the curse," she whispered. "We need to find a way to undo it." Their search continued, uncovering more artifacts and documents that painted a picture of a family entwined with dark forces. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle, revealing the depth of the curse's influence and the sacrifices made to contain it. One document detailed a ritual that promised to break the pact, but it required a rare artifact, a talisman hidden somewhere within the house. The talisman, according to the notes, was the key to severing the family's ties to the dark entity. Determined to find it, Kenta and Aiko scoured every corner of the house. Their search led them to the attic, a dusty and cluttered space filled with forgotten relics of the past. The air was stale and heavy, and the only light came from a single, grimy window. Among the old furniture and boxes, they found a small wooden chest, its lock long since rusted away. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk cloth, lay the talisman, a small, intricately carved stone amulet. Its surface was etched with the same symbols they had seen throughout the house. Holding it, Kenta felt a strange warmth, a sense of hope that had been missing for so long. With the talisman in hand, they returned to the hidden chamber. The instructions for the ritual were clear, but required precision and concentration. They prepared the space, placing the talisman on the altar and surrounding it with candles and herbs. As they began the ritual, chanting the ancient words from the journal, the room seemed to come alive. The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the walls glowed with an ethereal light. A cold wind swirled around them, carrying whispers of forgotten voices and the faint scent of decay. The talisman began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, resonating with their chants. As the ritual reached its climax, a shadowy figure appeared once more, its form less defined than before. The entity's eyes, however, still burned with an unholy fire. It roared in defiance, but the power of the ritual held it at bay. With one final, resounding chant, the talisman emitted a brilliant flash of light, engulfing the chamber in its radiance. When the light faded, the shadowy figure was gone. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. The curse had been broken. Exhausted but elated, Kenta and Aiko collapsed into each other's arms. The house, now free from its dark legacy, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. They had done it. The family's curse was finally lifted, and their home could once again become a place of peace and sanctuary. As they emerged from the basement, the first rays of the new day's light filled the house, casting away the lingering shadows. Kenta and Aiko knew there would be much to do to restore the home, but for the first time in many years, they felt a sense of hope and purpose. Together, they would rebuild, turning the house into a symbol of resilience and renewal. The Yamamoto family's dark history had been laid to rest, and with it, a new chapter began, a chapter filled with light, love, and the promise of a brighter future. The evening sun cast long, golden rays over the Yamamoto family home, illuminating the garden in a soft, ethereal glow. The chrysanthemums in full bloom swayed gently in the breeze, their vibrant colors contrasting sharply with the somber atmosphere that still lingered within the house. Despite the recent victory over the curse, an unsettling feeling of unfinished business gnawed at Kenta and Aiko. The house seemed more alive now, each creak and whisper echoing with stories untold, secrets yet to be uncovered. Kenta sat at the old wooden desk in the study, the ancient journal spread open before him. The talisman lay beside it, its surface still warm to the touch. Aiko entered the room, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. She placed it on the desk, her eyes reflecting the same mix of determination and trepidation that Kenta felt. "We did it, Kenta," she said, softly, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "Yes, we broke the curse," he replied, looking up at her. "But I feel there's more to this story." He flipped through the pages of the journal, searching for any overlooked clues. The entries detailed the pact with the dark entity, the rituals performed, and the tragic events that had befallen their ancestors. One entry caught his eye. It was dated several decades after the initial pact, written by another Yamamoto who had also attempted to break the curse. The entry was incomplete, abruptly ending mid-sentence. A chill ran down Kenta's spine as he realized the writer might have been interrupted, possibly meeting a grim fate. "We need to understand what happened to the others who tried to break the curse," Kenta said, determination hardening his voice. Aiko nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We should explore the rest of the house. There must be more hidden documents or clues." They decided to start with the second floor, a place Kenta had rarely ventured into as a child. The narrow staircase creaked under their weight, each step echoing through the silent house. The second floor consisted of several rooms, each filled with the remnants of their past: dusty furniture, old photographs, and forgotten belongings. They entered the master bedroom first. The room was large, dominated by an imposing 4-poster bed, covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was stale, and the heavy curtains blocked out most of the light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they searched the room, Aiko found a small, locked box hidden beneath the floorboards. Kenta used a letter opener to pry it open, revealing a collection of letters and a diary. The letters were addressed to various members of the Yamamoto family, all discussing the curse and the strange occurrences they had experienced. The diary belonged to Kenta's great-grandmother, who had lived in the house during a particularly tumultuous period. Her entries detailed her fears and the lengths she had gone to protect her family. One passage described a hidden room, a sanctuary where she had performed protective rituals. The description of the room matched the hidden chamber they had discovered in the basement. As they read further, they realized she had also been searching for a way to break the curse. Her notes mentioned a key, an artifact that could unlock the true power of the talisman. Determined to find this key, they continued their search, moving from room to room. In one of the guest bedrooms, they found a portrait of a young woman, her eyes filled with sadness and a hint of fear. On the back of the portrait was a note written in the same handwriting as the diary. "The key lies where the past and present meet," it read cryptically. They puzzled over the meaning of the note, the words echoing in their minds as they continued their search. The house seemed to come alive around them, each room revealing fragments of the pastel toys in a child's bedroom, a wedding dress in a forgotten wardrobe, and a music box that played a haunting melody. In the attic, they discovered a trunk filled with old clothes and personal items. Among them was a locket, its chain broken and tarnished with age. Inside the locket was a photograph of the same woman from the portrait, alongside a small, intricately carved key. Kenta held the key up to the light, feeling a sense of triumph. "This must be it," he said, his voice filled with excitement. Aiko looked at the key, her expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "But what does it unlock?" They returned to the hidden chamber, the key clutched tightly in Kenta's hand. As they approached the altar, the symbol began to glow faintly, as if recognizing the key's presence. They searched the chamber, looking for any hidden locks or compartments. Behind the altar, they found a small, intricately carved box, its lock matching the key perfectly. Kenta inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, and inside the box was a scroll, its surface covered in ancient script. The scroll detailed a final, decisive ritual loan that could permanently sever the family's ties to the dark entity. But it came with a warning: the ritual required a great sacrifice. A life for a life. Aiko's face paled as she read the words. "Kenta, this is too dangerous. We've already risked so much." Kenta's mind raced, torn between the desire to end the curse once and for all, and the fear of the unknown price they might have to pay. "We have to do this, Aiko," he said, his voice trembling with determination. "For our future, and for those who will come after us." They prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary items and carefully following the instructions on the scroll. The atmosphere in the chamber grew tense, the air thick with anticipation. As they began the ritual, the symbols on the walls glowed brighter, the air crackling with energy. The talisman pulsed with light, resonating with their chants. The room grew colder, and a shadowy figure began to materialize, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. Kenta and Aiko continued the ritual, their voices steady, despite the fear gripping their hearts. As the ritual reached its climax, the shadowy figure let out a deafening roar, its form wavering and shifting. The talisman's light intensified, engulfing the chamber in a blinding radiance. When the light faded, the shadowy figure was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a feeling of peace. The curse had been broken. Kenta and Aiko collapsed to the floor, exhausted but elated. They had done it. The family's curse was finally lifted, and their home could once again become a place of peace and sanctuary. As they emerged from the basement, the first rays of the new day's light filled the house, casting away the lingering shadows. Kenta and Aiko knew there would be much to do to restore the home, but for the first time in many years, they felt a sense of hope and purpose. Together, they would rebuild, turning the house into a symbol of resilience and renewal. The Yamamoto family's dark history had been laid to rest, and with it, a new chapter. began a chapter filled with light, love, and the promise of a brighter future. The moon cast a pale, ghostly light over the Yamamoto family home, its beams filtering through the skeletal branches of the ancient trees. The once serene garden now seemed a landscape of shadows and whispers, each rustling leaf and creaking branch hinting at unseen presences. Kenta and Eiko stood at the entrance, the cold night air biting at their skin, their breath visible in the dim light. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the silence almost oppressive. Despite their earlier success in breaking the curse, an unsettling feeling lingered. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Kenta led Eiko into the living room, where they had gathered the artifacts and documents they had discovered. The talisman, still glowing faintly, lay at the center of the table, surrounded by old letters, diaries, and the scroll detailing the final ritual. "We did everything right," Eiko said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do I still feel like something is wrong?" Kenta shared her unease. He felt it too, sensed that their work was not yet complete. "We must have missed something," he replied, his brow furrowed in thought. "Maybe there's more to this than we realize." As they pored over the documents once more, a sense of dread settled over them. The final ritual had indeed severed the family's ties to the dark entity, but it had also awakened something else, an ancient force that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Kenta found a note tucked inside one of the diaries, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "The curse is broken, but the house remembers. The past will not be silenced." The words sent a chill down his spine. "We need to go back to the hidden chamber," he said, determination hardening his voice. "There's something there we didn't see before." Eiko nodded, her fear evident but overshadowed by her resolve. They descended into the basement, their footsteps echoing through the silent house. The hidden chamber, now illuminated by the talisman's glow, felt more ominous than ever. As they entered, the air grew colder, and the faint scent of decay filled their nostrils. The symbols on the walls glowed with an eerie light, casting strange shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Kenta and Eiko approached the altar, their eyes scanning the room for any hidden clues. Behind the altar, they found a small, concealed door, its surface covered in the same ancient symbols. Kenta used the key they had found earlier, inserting it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway that descended further into the darkness. Taking a deep breath, they stepped into the passage, the walls closing in around them as they ventured deeper into the house's hidden depths. The passageway led to a cavernous room, its ceiling lost in the shadows. At the center of the room stood a large stone altar, similar to the one in the hidden chamber, but much larger and more elaborate. The air was thick with an ancient, oppressive energy, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts and dusty tomes. Kenta approached the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. As he examined the intricate carvings, he realized that this was the true heart of the curse, the place where the pact had been made and where the dark entity had been summoned. Eiko joined him, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. "We need to finish this," she said, her voice trembling. Kenta nodded, his resolve unwavering. "We need to perform the final ritual here, where it all began." They gathered the necessary items, following the instructions on the scroll with meticulous care. As they began the ritual, the room seemed to come alive, the air crackling with energy. The symbols on the altar glowed brightly, casting an eerie light that illuminated the entire room. The talisman pulsed with a rhythmic light, resonating with their chants. The shadows on the walls shifted and writhed, forming shapes that seemed almost human. As the ritual reached its climax, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. The figure let out a deafening roar, its form wavering and shifting as it struggled against the power of the ritual. Kenta and Eiko continued their chants, their voices steady despite the fear gripping their hearts. The talisman's light intensified, engulfing the room in a blinding radiance. When the light faded, The shadowy figure was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a feeling of peace. The curse had been broken, and the house was finally free from its dark legacy. Kenta and Aiko collapsed to the floor, exhausted but elated. They had done it. The family's curse was finally lifted, and their home could once again become a place of peace and sanctuary. As they emerged from the basement, the first rays of the new day's light filled the house, casting away the lingering shadows. Kenta and Aiko knew there would be much to do to restore the home, but for the first time in many years, they felt a sense of hope and purpose. Together, they would rebuild, turning the house into a symbol of resilience and renewal. The Yamamoto family's dark history had been laid to rest, and with it, a new chapter began, a chapter filled with light, love, and the promise of a brighter future. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and determination. Kenta and Aiko, with the help of a few trusted friends, began the long process of restoring the house. They repaired the damaged walls, replaced the broken windows, and cleared away the debris that had accumulated over the years. Each day brought new challenges, but also a sense of accomplishment and progress. As they worked, the house began to change. The dark, oppressive atmosphere was replaced by a feeling of warmth and light. The once shadowy corners were now filled with sunlight, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. One evening, as they were finishing up for the day, Kenta and Aiko stood in the garden, looking up at the house. It was still a work in progress, but the transformation was already evident. The house, once a symbol of fear and despair, was now a place of hope and renewal. "We did it," Kenta said, his voice filled with pride and satisfaction. Aiko nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "Yes, we did. And it's only the beginning." As they embraced, the moon rose above the trees, casting a silvery light over the garden. The house, bathed in the soft glow, seemed to stand taller and prouder, as if acknowledging the efforts of those who had worked so hard to save it. The past would always be a part of the Yamamoto family's history, but it no longer held the power to control their future. With the curse lifted and the house restored, they could finally move forward, free from the shadows of the past. Kenta and Aiko knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but they also knew that they had the strength and determination to face them. Together, they had overcome the darkness, and together, they would build a new future, a future filled with light, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. On a quiet, misty evening in a small village nestled between the dense forests of Hokkaido, the air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of pine. The old house, abandoned for years, stood as a silent sentinel at the edge of the village, its wooden structure creaking with age and neglect. The overgrown garden was a wild tangle of weeds and vines, choking the once superb cherry blossom trees that lined the path to the front porch. The house had a reputation, whispered among the villagers, of being haunted by a spirit known as the porch light phantom. Its dim, flickering light was said to appear sporadically, casting an eerie glow on the decrepit porch, drawing the curious and the foolish alike. Kazuki, a young man in his early 30s, had returned to his childhood village after many years in Tokyo. The hustle and bustle of city life had worn him down, and he sought solace in the familiar, tranquil surroundings of his youth. Accompanying him was his wife, Aiko, a quiet woman with a keen sense of curiosity and a penchant for the supernatural. They had heard the stories, of course, but dismissed them as mere folklore, the fanciful imaginings of a superstitious village. One evening, as they strolled hand in hand along the village's winding paths, they found themselves drawn to the old house. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to twinkle in the deepening twilight. The air grew cooler, and a light fall began to roll in from the forest, shrouding the village in an ethereal veil. As they approached the house, Kazuki noticed the faint glow of the porch light, flickering like a distant firefly. Eiko, intrigued, suggested they take a closer look. Kazuki hesitated, a chill running down his spine. But his wife's enthusiasm was infectious. Together, they stepped onto the creaking wooden porch, the boards groaning under their weight. The light flickered again, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Eiko reached out to touch the light, but as her fingers brushed against it, the glow vanished, plunging them into darkness. Kazuki felt a surge of fear, his heart pounding in his chest, but Eiko's calm demeanor steadied him. She suggested they explore the house, convinced that the light was merely a trick of the old wiring. Reluctantly, Kazuki agreed, and they pushed open the heavy front door, which groaned in protest. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay and abandonment. Dust motes floated in the beams of their flashlights, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. They moved from room to room, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Each room told a story of its own, from the faded photographs on the walls to the tattered furniture covered in dust sheets. In one room, they found an old piano, its keys yellowed and silent, a ghost of music long forgotten. In another, a bookshelf filled with ancient tomes, their pages brittle and yellowed with age. As they made their way upstairs, the sense of unease grew stronger. Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the house itself was alive, aware of their presence. Eiko, on the other hand, seemed unfazed, her curiosity driving her forward. At the end of the hallway, they found a door slightly ajar, a faint light seeping through the crack. Kazuki's breath caught in his throat as he pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was a rocking chair, gently swaying back and forth as if moved by an unseen hand. Eiko stepped forward, her eyes wide with fascination. But Kazuki held her back, a sense of dread washing over him. Suddenly, the light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Kazuki's flashlight sputtered and died, leaving them in complete blackness. He fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling, and managed to turn on the flashlight. In the beam of light, they saw the rocking chair, now still, and a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in shadows. Kazuki's heart raced as he backed away, pulling Eiko with him. The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, and Kazuki felt a scream rising in his throat. But before he could utter a sound, the figure vanished, leaving them alone in the dark, silent room. Breathing heavily, Kazuki and Eiko hurried down the stairs and out of the house, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Once outside, they paused to catch their breath, the cold night air a welcome relief from the oppressive atmosphere of the house. Kazuki looked back at the house, its dark windows staring back at him like empty eyes. He knew they had to leave, to get as far away from the haunted place as possible. But something in Eiko's expression gave him pause. She seemed different, her eyes shining with a strange light, and he felt a shiver of fear. That night, as they lay in bed, Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them from the house, a presence lurking in the shadows. He glanced at Eiko, her face serene in the moonlight, and wondered what she had seen in that room, what had changed within her. As sleep finally claimed him, he dreamt of the porch light, flickering in the darkness, and the figure standing in the shadows, waiting, watching. The next day, Kazuki and Eiko decided to leave the village, their bags packed and ready by the door. But as they prepared to leave, Eiko hesitated, her eyes drawn to the old house at the edge of the village. Kazuki, sensing her reluctance, tried to reassure her, but she seemed distant, her thoughts elsewhere. They left the village behind, the old house a fading memory in the rearview mirror. But Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with the porch light phantom was far from over. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Kazuki would wake in the middle of the night to find Eiko standing by the window, staring out at the darkness. She would mumble in her sleep, speaking in a voice that was not her own. and he would hear the faint, distant sound of a rocking chair creaking. One night, he woke to find her gone, the front door wide open, and the porch light flickering in the darkness. Panic surged through him as he searched the house, calling her name, but there was no response. Finally, he found her on the porch, standing in the cold night air, her eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the old house. He pulled her back inside, his heart pounding with fear, and she seemed to snap out of her trance, looking at him with confusion. In the days that followed, Kazuki became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the porch light phantom had somehow attached itself to them, haunting their every step. He began to research the history of the house, uncovering a dark tale of betrayal and murder that had left a lingering stain on the village. The house had once belonged to a wealthy merchant who had been betrayed by his closest friend and left to die on the porch, his spirit forever bound to the place of his demise. Kazuki realized that they had awakened the spirit, and now it sought revenge, using Eiko as its vessel. Desperate, he sought the help of a local priest who performed a purification ritual on their home. But the strange occurrences only intensified. Kazuki knew they had to return to the house to confront the spirit and put an end to the haunting once and for all. Armed with a resolve born of desperation, they returned to the village, to the old house that had become the source of their nightmares. As they stepped onto the porch, the light flickered once more, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Kazuki took Eiko's hand, his grip firm, and together they pushed open the door, ready to face whatever awaited them inside. In the dim light of the hallway, they saw the rocking chair, still and silent, and the faint outline of the figure in the corner. Kazuki felt a surge of fear, but he pushed it aside, determined to save his wife and rid themselves of the ghostly presence. With a deep breath, they stepped forward into the darkness, into the unknown, to confront the porch light phantom and end the haunting that had turned their lives into a living nightmare. Kazuki and Eiko stood at the entrance of the old house, their breath visible in the cold night air. The porch light flickered once more, casting eerie shadows across their faces. Kazuki tightened his grip on Eiko's hand, his determination bolstered by the fear in her eyes. They stepped inside, the door creaking loudly as it closed behind them. The musty scent of decay and abandonment filled their nostrils, and the silence was oppressive. Kazuki switched on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, revealing the dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper. Their footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as they moved cautiously forward. Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the house itself was alive and aware of their presence. Eiko, ever the skeptic, seemed more curious than frightened. She led the way, her eyes scanning every corner, searching for the source of the haunting. They reached the base of the staircase, the old wood creaking under their weight as they ascended. Each step seemed to resonate with a sense of foreboding, as if the house were warning them to turn back. At the top of the stairs, they paused, their breaths shallow and rapid. Kazuki's flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Ahead of them, the door to the small room where they had first encountered the figure stood slightly ajar, a faint light seeping through the crack. Kazuki felt a chill run down his spine as he pushed the door open. The rocking chair was still, bathed in the dim light from an unseen source. The figure in the corner, however, was gone. Kazuki and Eiko stepped into the room, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Suddenly, the light flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Kazuki's flashlight sputtered and died, leaving them in complete blackness. He fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling, and managed to turn on the flashlight app. In the beam of light, they saw the rocking chair, now gently swaying back and forth, as if moved by an unseen hand. Kazuki's heart raced as he backed away, pulling Eiko with him. A cold breeze seemed to flow through the room, carrying with it a whisper of voices, faint and unintelligible. Eiko's eyes widened as she clutched Kazuki's arm, her face pale with fear. Kazuki felt a surge of protectiveness and fear, his mind racing with thoughts of how to escape this nightmare. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the empty house. Kazuki rushed to the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through him as he pounded on the door, shouting for help, but there was no response. Aiko, her voice trembling, suggested they look for another way out. They turned back to the room, their flashlights illuminating the shadows as they searched for an exit. In the corner, where the figure had once stood, Kazuki noticed a small trapdoor, partially hidden beneath a threadbare rug. He knelt down, pulling the rug aside to reveal the door. With a sense of urgency, he pried it open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the unknown. Kazuki and Aiko exchanged a glance, their fear palpable. But they knew they had no other choice. They descended the stairs, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The narrow passageway seemed to close in around them, the walls rough and uneven. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small, dank cellar. The walls were lined with old shelves, filled with dusty jars and broken tools. In the center of the room stood a large wooden chest, its surface covered in intricate carvings. Kazuki approached the chest, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached out to open it, a cold hand grasped his wrist, stopping him in his tracks. He turned, his flashlight illuminating the face of an old woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. Kazuki stumbled back, pulling Aiko with him. The old woman spoke in a voice that seemed to echo through the cellar, her words filled with a sense of despair. "You should not have come here," she said, her eyes boring into Kazuki's. "This place is cursed, and now you are part of it." Kazuki felt a surge of fear and confusion as the old woman stepped back, her form fading into the shadows. He turned back to the chest, his mind racing with questions. What was the curse she spoke of? And how were they part of it? With a sense of determination, he opened the chest, revealing its contents. Inside, he found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it, his flashlight illuminating the faded handwriting. The diary belonged to the merchant, who had once owned the house, and it detailed his betrayal and murder. Kazuki read the entries, his heart sinking as he realized the depth of the tragedy that had unfolded in the house. The merchant had been betrayed by his closest friend, who had coveted his wealth and position. In a fit of rage and jealousy, the friend had murdered the merchant, leaving his body on the porch to be discovered by the villagers. The merchant's spirit, filled with anger and a desire for revenge, had been bound to the house, haunting it ever since. Kazuki felt a chill run down his spine as he read the final entry. Written in a shaky hand, "I will not rest until my killer is brought to justice," the entry read. "My spirit will haunt this house, and all who enter it, until my revenge is complete." Kazuki closed the diary, his mind racing with thoughts of how to break the curse. He knew they had to find a way to bring the merchant's killer to justice, to free his spirit from its torment. As they ascended the stairs, Kazuki and Aiko felt a renewed sense of determination. They would uncover the truth and put an end to the haunting once and for all. Back in the village, they sought out the oldest residents, hoping to find someone who remembered the events of that fateful night. They spoke to a woman named Yuki, who had lived in the village her entire life. She remembered the merchant and his betrayal, and she told them of a hidden room in the house, where the merchant's killer had hidden his ill-gotten gains. Kazuki and Aiko returned to the house, their resolve strengthened by Yuki's words. They searched the house, their flashlights illuminating the shadows as they moved from room to room. Finally, in the basement, they found a hidden door, concealed behind a false wall. Inside, they found the treasure, still intact, and the skeletal remains of the merchant's killer. Kazuki felt a surge of triumph. As he realized they had found the key to breaking the curse, they took the treasure and the remains to the village. Presenting them to the priest, he performed a purification ritual, and the spirit of the merchant was finally freed. Kazuki and Eiko felt a sense of relief and closure as they watched their house. Its windows now dark and empty, the porch light no longer flickering. They knew the haunting was over, and they could finally move on with their lives. But as they turned to leave, Kazuki glanced back at the house, and for a moment he thought he saw the figure of the old woman watching them from the shadows. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the light, and walked away, his hand tightly clasped in Eiko's. As they left the village, they felt a sense of peace and renewal. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, and they knew they would never forget the lessons they had learned. The porch light phantom was no more, and the village could finally rest in peace. The night was unusually quiet as Kazuki and Eiko sat in their small, candlelit living room, poring over the old diary they had found in the haunted house. The wind outside whispered through the trees, a haunting melody that seemed to echo the despair and anger within the pages. The soft flicker of the candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, adding to the already tense atmosphere. Kazuki's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, each entry revealing more about the tragic past of the merchant and his betrayal. Eiko, sitting close beside him, read aloud the words written in a spidery, aged script. The merchant was a kind man, beloved by the villagers. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. But his success bred envy in the heart of his closest friend, Takashi. Takashi, consumed by jealousy, plotted to take everything the merchant had. Kazuki's mind raced as he listened, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. The merchant's spirit was bound to the house, seeking justice for the betrayal and murder that had left him restless in the afterlife. "We have to find Takashi's descendants," Kazuki said, his voice filled with determination. "They are the key to breaking the curse and freeing the merchant's spirit." Eiko nodded, her expression resolute. They had to act quickly before the haunting took a more sinister turn. The next morning, they set out to gather information about Takashi's descendants. Their first stop was the village's small, ancient library, where they hoped to find records and documents that could lead them to the present-day family. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Sato, was more than willing to help. She led them to a dusty corner of the library, where old records were kept, pulling out a large, leather-bound book filled with the village's history. Kazuki and Eiko pored over the records, searching for any mention of Takashi and his family. Hours passed, and their hope began to wane, until Eiko stumbled upon a small entry detailing Takashi's lineage. "Here it is," she said excitedly, pointing to a name in the book. "Takashi's grandson Hiroshi still lives in the neighboring town." Kazuki felt a surge of relief and anticipation. They had a lead. They thanked Mrs. Sato and left the library, determined to find Hiroshi and uncover the truth. The drive to the neighboring town was filled with a tense silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. Kazuki's mind was racing with questions and scenarios, while Eiko's expression was one of grim determination. When they arrived, they wasted no time in locating Hiroshi's house, a modest, well-kept home on the outskirts of town. Kazuki knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gentle but curious. Kazuki and Eiko introduced themselves and explained their purpose, recounting the tragic story of the merchant and Takashi's betrayal. Hiroshi listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "I've heard the stories," he said finally, his voice tinged with sadness. "My grandfather was a man consumed by jealousy and greed. I always suspected there was more to the story." Kazuki and Eiko shared the details of their encounter with the porch light phantom and their discovery of the diary. Hiroshi's eyes widened as he listened, a mix of fear and understanding crossing his face. "We need your help to put an end to this," Kazuki said, his voice earnest. "The merchant's spirit won't rest until justice is served." Hiroshi nodded slowly, his expression resolute. "I will help you," he said firmly. "My family has carried this burden for too long. It's time to make amends. Together, they returned to the village and the old house, the air heavy with anticipation. As they approached the house, the porch light flickered once more, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with a malevolent intent. Kazuki, Eiko, and Hiroshi stood before the house, their faces set with determination. They knew this was their only chance to put an end to the haunting and free the merchant's spirit. They entered the house, the air inside cold and oppressive. Kazuki led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as they made their way to the small room where they had first encountered the figure. The rocking chair was still, bathed in the dim light from an unseen source. Kazuki's heart raced as he approached the chair, his mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. Hiroshi stepped forward, his voice steady as he spoke to the empty room. "I am Hiroshi, the grandson of Takashi. I know of the betrayal and the wrongs committed against you. We are here to make amends and seek your forgiveness." The air grew colder, and a faint, whispering voice seemed to echo through the room. Kazuki felt a chill run down his spine as the figure of the old woman appeared once more. Her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. "You seek forgiveness," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "But the pain and betrayal cannot be undone so easily." Hiroshi stepped closer, his expression one of genuine remorse. "My grandfather's actions were unforgivable, but we want to set things right. Please, tell us how we can help you find peace." The old woman gazed at Hiroshi for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she spoke, her voice filled with a weary sadness. "The treasure must be returned to its rightful place, and the truth of my death must be known to all. Only then can my spirit find rest." Kazuki and Eiko exchanged a glance, their resolve strengthened by the old woman's words. They had found the treasure in the hidden room, and now they had to return it and reveal the truth. With Hiroshi's help, they carefully transported the treasure back to the village. Presenting it to the village council, the story of the merchant's betrayal and murder was told, and the village finally learned the truth. As the treasure was placed in the village shrine, a sense of peace seemed to settle over the village. Kazuki and Eiko returned to the house, the air feeling lighter and the oppressive atmosphere gone. The porch light no longer flickered, and the house seemed to have lost its malevolent presence. In the small room, the figure of the old woman appeared once more, her eyes filled with a serene peace. "Thank you," she said softly, her form slowly fading into the shadows. Kazuki and Eiko watched as she disappeared, a sense of closure and relief washing over them. Hiroshi, standing beside them, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The curse was broken, and the spirit was finally at peace. As they left the house for the last time, the sun began to rise, casting a warm golden light over the village. Kazuki and Eiko felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose, knowing they had helped to right a terrible wrong. They knew the village would never forget the story of the merchant and the porch light phantom, but now it could move forward, free from the haunting that had plagued it for so long. As they drove away, Kazuki glanced back at the house one last time, a sense of peace settling over him. The porch light phantom was no more, and the village could finally rest in peace. Their journey had been filled with fear and uncertainty, but they had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. They knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had faced the haunting of the porch light phantom. The village too would move forward, its people carrying the lessons of the past with them, but no longer haunted by the shadows of betrayal and revenge. The chill of the early morning air seemed to penetrate deep into their bones as Kazuki, Eiko, and Hiroshi stood before the old house. The porch light, once a malevolent beacon, now lay dormant, but the sense of foreboding remained. Kazuki glanced at Eiko, her determined expression mirroring his own resolve. They had come too far to turn back now. They entered the house, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet. The interior was shrouded in darkness, but there was an unmistakable presence, a palpable tension that made the hair on the back of Kazuki's neck stand on end. They moved cautiously through the hallways, their footsteps echoing in the silence. In the small room where they had first encountered the spirit, the air was thick with an oppressive energy. Kazuki felt his heart race as they approached the rocking chair, now still and silent. The figure of the old woman, the merchant's spirit, appeared once more, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "You have done well to bring the treasure back and reveal the truth," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "But there is still one final task that must be completed." Kazuki felt a chill run down his spine as the old woman's gaze settled on Hiroshi. The bloodline of the betrayer must atone for its sins, she continued, her voice filled with a quiet fury. "Hiroshi must make a sacrifice to break the curse and free my spirit." Hiroshi's face went pale, but he nodded slowly, his expression resolute. "I understand," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I will do whatever it takes to set things right." Kazuki and Eiko exchanged a worried glance, but they knew there was no other way. They had come too far to turn back now. The old woman gestured to a small, hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, which Kazuki pried open with trembling hands. Inside, they found a ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming in the dim light. Hiroshi took the dagger, his hands steady despite the gravity of the task ahead. The old woman instructed him to cut his palm and let the blood fall onto the floorboards, symbolizing the atonement of the bloodline. Hiroshi did as she asked, the dagger slicing through his skin with a sharp, painful precision. Blood dripped onto the floor, soaking into the ancient wood. As the blood flowed, the air grew colder, and the oppressive energy seemed to intensify. Kazuki and Eiko watched in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding light, and the figure of the old woman began to fade. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a weary relief. "You have freed me from my torment." With those final words, she disappeared, leaving Kazuki, Eiko, and Hiroshi standing in the now silent room. The oppressive energy was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Kazuki felt a wave of relief wash over him, and he turned to Eiko, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the morning light. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Eiko nodded, her eyes filled with tears. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious, breaking the curse that had plagued the village for generations. Hiroshi, his hands still bleeding, but his expression serene, turned to Kazuki and Eiko. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You have helped me atone for my family's sins and bring peace to the village." Kazuki and Eiko smiled, their hearts filled with a sense of accomplishment. They had done what many thought impossible, and they had done it together. As they left the old house for the last time, the sun rose over the village, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. The air was filled with the sounds of birds singing, and the village seemed to come alive with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Kazuki and Eiko knew that their lives would never be the same, but they also knew that they had found a strength within themselves that they never knew existed. They had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, and they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As they drove away from the village, Kazuki glanced back at the old house one last time, a sense of peace settling over him. The porch light phantom was no more, and the village could finally rest in peace. Their journey had been filled with fear and uncertainty, but they had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. They knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had faced the haunting of the porch light phantom. The village too would move forward, its people carrying the lessons of the past with them, but no longer haunted by the shadows of betrayal and revenge. As they drove into the distance, the sun rose higher in the sky, a symbol of new beginnings and the promise of a brighter future. Kazuki and Eiko held hands, their hearts filled with hope and determination. They had faced the darkness and won, and they knew that they could face anything that came their way. The road ahead was long, but they were ready for whatever lay ahead, knowing that they had each other and the strength to overcome any obstacle. The porch light phantom was now a memory, a story that would be told for generations to come. But the fear and the pain had been left behind, replaced by a sense of peace and renewal. Kazuki and Eiko looked forward to the future, knowing that they had faced their fears and emerged victorious, stronger and more united than ever before. The village too would move forward, its people carrying the lessons of the past with them, but no longer haunted by the shadows of betrayal and revenge. The porch light phantom was no more, and the village could finally rest in peace. The rain fell softly on the ancient village, creating a rhythmic patter on the cobblestone streets. The evening air was thick with humidity, and a dense fog rolled in from the nearby forest, blanketing everything in a ghostly shroud. The houses, old and worn, stood silently, their wooden frames creaking with age. Among these relics stood an enigmatic house, larger and more ominous than the rest. Its once white exterior was now a decaying grey, and the windows, covered in grime, gave it an eerie, abandoned look. However, it was not the decrepit state of the house that drew attention. It was the windowless windows that seemed to lead to nowhere. Nako, a young woman in her late 20s, arrived in the village with her friend Hiroshi, a few years older and more skeptical of the paranormal. They had heard stories about the house from an old villager who claimed it was cursed. Nako, an amateur photographer, was intrigued by the tales and wanted to capture the essence of the mysterious house through her lens. Hiroshi, ever the rational thinker, accompanied her out of concern. As they approached the house, a chill ran down their spines. The house loomed over them, its presence almost tangible in the dense fog. Nako took a deep breath and stepped forward, her camera ready. Hiroshi followed closely, his eyes darting around, wary of any sign of danger. The front door creaked open with a push, revealing a dark and musty interior. The air inside was stale, and the wooden floorboards groaned under their weight. Nako switched on her flashlight, casting long shadows on the walls. The interior was a time capsule from the past, filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. Each room they explored seemed to tell a story of a bygone era. But there was an unsettling feeling that they were not alone. In the dim light, they noticed something peculiar. The windows, which from the outside seemed normal, albeit dirty, from the inside were blocked by solid walls. There was no view, no light coming through them. It was as if the house itself was hiding something. Nako took pictures of the bizarre windows, her excitement mixed with a growing sense of dread. Hiroshi, on the other hand, felt a mounting unease. As they moved deeper into the house, they came across a staircase leading to the second floor. Despite his reservations, Hiroshi followed Nako up the creaking steps. The upper floor was even more dilapidated, with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture scattered around. In one of the rooms, they found a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. Its surface was covered in a thick layer of dust, obscuring their reflections. Nako wiped the dust away, revealing their faces in the dim light. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath became visible in the frigid air. Hiroshi turned to leave, urging Nako to do the same. But she was entranced by the mirror. She felt a strange compulsion to stay, to uncover the secrets hidden within the house. Reluctantly, Hiroshi agreed to explore one last room before they left. They entered a small, narrow hallway that led to a door at the end. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered inside. Nako pushed the door open, revealing a small room with a single window. Unlike the others, this window was clear, and through it, they could see a beautiful garden bathed in moonlight. The sight was mesmerizing, almost too perfect to be real. Nako stepped closer to the window, drawn by the serene beauty of the garden. As she reached out to touch the glass, the light flickered again, and the image of the garden wavered. She blinked, and the garden was gone. replaced by a reflection of the room they were standing in. Startled, she stepped back, bumping into Hiroshi. He steadied her, his face pale with fear. They both realized that the house was playing tricks on them, showing them what it wanted them to see. Desperate to leave, they made their way back downstairs. But the house seemed to resist their departure. The walls groaned and the floorboards shifted, making every step a perilous journey. Just as they reached the front door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. They were trapped. Panic set in, and they frantically searched for another way out. In their haste, they stumbled upon a hidden door in the living room, partially concealed behind an old bookshelf. With no other options, they pushed the bookshelf aside and opened the door, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the basement. The basement was cold and damp, with a musty smell that made them gag. Their flashlights barely penetrated the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. As they descended, they heard faint whispers, indistinct and haunting. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with a sense of dread. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was an old wooden table, and on it lay an ancient-looking book. The book was open, its pages filled with strange symbols and drawings. Nako reached out to touch it, but Hiroshi grabbed her hand, shaking his head. They both knew that whatever was in that book, it was the source of the house's malevolent power. Before they could leave, the whispers turned into screams. The room shook violently, and the walls seemed to close in on them. They fled up the stairs, barely escaping the collapsing basement. Back in the living room, they found the front door miraculously open. Without looking back, they ran out of the house and into the night, the screams echoing in their ears. The rain had stopped, and the fog had lifted, revealing a clear night sky. They didn't stop running until they reached the village square. Gasping for breath, in the safety of the village, they recounted their experience to the old villager, who had told them about the house. He listened intently, nodding as they described the windows and the mirror. When they finished, he told them that the house had a dark history. It was once owned by a wealthy family who practiced dark rituals, trying to open a gateway to another world. The windows to nowhere were a result of their failed attempts, trapping the spirits of those who had died in the house. The mirror was a portal, showing glimpses of the world they sought to enter. The garden they saw was a lure, meant to draw them in and trap them forever. Nako and Hiroshi were horrified. They had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The old villager warned them never to return to the house, and to tell no one of their experience. The house was alive, and it fed on fear. Nako deleted the photos she had taken, vowing never to speak of the house again. But the memory of the windows to nowhere and the haunting whispers would stay with them forever, a reminder of the night they faced the unknown and survived. As they left the village, the house stood silently, its windows dark and foreboding. It would wait for its next victims, ready to show them the beauty of a garden that didn't exist, and trap them in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Nako and Hiroshi returned to their city lives, trying to bury the memories of that eerie night. However, the haunting experience in the house had left an indelible mark on their minds. Nako found herself drawn to the photographs she had taken before deleting them. The images burned into her memory. Hiroshi, on the other hand, became more protective and cautious, sensing a lingering threat. A few weeks after their return, Nako started experiencing strange occurrences in her apartment. At night, she would hear faint whispers, much like those in the house, and cold drafts would sweep through her rooms despite the windows being closed. Her curiosity and fear grew in equal measure, compelling her to investigate further. One evening, she decided to visit Hiroshi, hoping he could offer some solace or explanation. Hiroshi's apartment was a stark contrast to Nako's. It was meticulously organized, reflecting his logical and structured mind. However, even here, Nako couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Hiroshi welcomed her in, and they sat down to discuss the unsettling events. Nako described the whispers and the cold drafts, her voice trembling slightly. Hiroshi listened intently, his expression serious. He admitted that he too had felt an inexplicable chill at times and had seen shadows move in the corner of his eyes. The rational part of his mind dismissed these as tricks of the light or stress, but the experience in the house had shaken his confidence. Determined to find answers, they decided to research the history of the house and the family that once lived there. They hoped to uncover clues that could explain the bizarre phenomena following them. Their investigation led them to an old library in the city, known for its extensive archives on local history. The librarian, an elderly man with a keen interest in the supernatural, directed them to a dusty corner, filled with old newspapers and records. As they sifted through the yellowed pages, they discovered articles about the family who owned the house. The family, the Sato clan, was wealthy and influential in the early 20th century. However, rumors surrounded their sudden disappearance and the subsequent abandonment of their home. One article mentioned a daughter, Ayumi Sato, who was known to be a gifted painter. Her artwork was said to be mesmerizing, capturing the beauty of their garden in haunting detail. Intriguingly, it was reported that Ayumi began to change after a series of mysterious deaths in the family. Neighbors claimed she would talk to herself, her conversations seemingly directed at unseen entities. Her paintings became darker, depicting disturbing scenes that contrasted sharply with her earlier works. Nako and Hiroshi realized that Ayumi's paintings might hold the key to understanding the curse of the house. They learned that some of her works were stored in a small local museum. The next day, they visited the museum, which was quaint and unassuming, nestled in a quiet part of the city. The curator, a middle-aged woman with an air of secrecy, guided them to the section displaying Ayumi's paintings. The paintings were indeed beautiful, but carried an undercurrent of unease. Among them was a large canvas, depicting the garden they had seen through the window. Nako felt a shiver run down her spine as she recognized the scene. It was exactly as she remembered, down to the smallest detail. The curator noticed their interest and offered to show them Ayumi's diary, which had been donated along with her paintings. The diary was old, its pages brittle, and filled with elegant but erratic handwriting. As they read, they uncovered Ayumi's descent into madness. She wrote about voices calling to her from the mirrors and windows, promising eternal beauty and peace if she joined them. The diary entries became increasingly frantic, detailing her attempts to resist the lure of the otherworldly beings. Ayumi described how the windows and mirrors would show her different realities, tempting her to step through. She believed that her family's deaths were orchestrated by these entities, who wanted to claim their souls. The last entry was the most chilling. Ayumi wrote about a final ritual to seal the gateway and trap the malevolent spirits forever. However, she expressed doubt about its success, fearing the entities were too powerful. Nako and Hiroshi felt a growing sense of urgency. They realized that the malevolent force from the house was not just confined to its walls, it had followed them. Desperate to protect themselves, they decided to return to the house and complete the ritual Ayumi had described. Armed with the diary and their determination, they made their way back to the village. The journey was tense, filled with an unspoken fear of what awaited them. Upon arriving, they found the village shrouded in an eerie silence. The house stood as ominously as before, its windows still dark and foreboding. They steeled themselves and entered, the atmosphere inside even more oppressive than their last visit. Following the instructions in Ayumi's diary, they gathered the necessary items: candles, incense, and a small, intricately carved box that Ayumi had hidden in the house. They set up the ritual in the living room, where the presence felt strongest. As they began the ritual, the temperature dropped and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The house seemed to come alive, its walls closing in, as if trying to suffocate them. Nako chanted the incantations from the diary, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Hiroshi stood guard, his eyes scanning for any signs of danger. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and they felt a powerful force trying to break through. In the chairs, Hiroshi saw a shadowy figure emerging from one of the blocked windows. It reached out with ghostly hands, trying to pull them into the void. With a surge of determination, Nako completed the final chant, and the force subsided. The room fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the candles reignited on their own. They had succeeded in sealing the gateway, but the ordeal had left them exhausted and shaken. They left the house for the last time, the weight of their experience heavy on their minds. Back in the village, the old villager, who had first told them about the house, awaited their return. He listened to their tale, nodding with understanding. He revealed that he was a descendant of the Sato family, tasked with watching over the house and ensuring the ritual was performed if needed. Nako and Hiroshi had fulfilled a duty that had been waiting for decades. As they departed the village, they felt a sense of closure, but the experience had changed them. They knew that the memory of the house and its haunting whispers would remain with them forever. They had faced the unknown and survived, but the shadow of the house would always be a part of their lives. The windows to nowhere were now sealed, but the fear and mystery of that night would never truly fade. With their mission complete, they hoped to move on and live their lives free from the specter of the past. Yet, in the quiet moments, they would always remember the house and the unseen threat that had once nearly claimed them. The days following their return from the village were filled with an uneasy calm for Nako and Hiroshi. They tried to resume their normal lives, but the haunting memories of the house lingered. Nako's nights were restless, plagued by vivid dreams of the house and its dark past. Hiroshi, though outwardly composed, felt an ever-present tension, as if the shadows from the house had followed them back. Nako decided to delve deeper into Ayumi Sato's life, hoping to find some closure. She visited the local library, spending hours poring over old records and newspapers. She discovered more about the Sato family's tragic history. The family was once a prominent part of the community, known for their wealth and influence. However, a series of mysterious deaths led to their downfall. Ayumi's descent into madness was well documented, with her paintings becoming increasingly dark and disturbing. Nako felt a strange connection to Ayumi, as if their fates were somehow intertwined. One afternoon, Nako received a call from Hiroshi. His voice was tense, and he asked her to meet him at a cafe near his apartment. When she arrived, she found Hiroshi looking more anxious than she had ever seen him. He revealed that he had been experiencing vivid nightmares and strange occurrences in his apartment. Objects moved on their own, and he often felt a cold presence watching him. They both realized that the house's malevolent influence had not been fully eradicated. Determined to end the haunting once and for all, Nako and Hiroshi decided to consult an expert on the supernatural. They reached out to Professor Ishikawa, a renowned scholar of Japanese folklore and paranormal phenomena. The professor agreed to meet them at his office at the university. When they arrived, they found the professor to be a calm and knowledgeable man in his 60s with a deep interest in their story. After listening to their experiences, Professor Ishikawa explained that such hauntings were often the result of unresolved spiritual conflicts. He suggested that the spirits of the Sato family, particularly Ayumi, were still trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. To truly end the haunting, they would need to perform a purification ritual at the house, guided by an experienced medium. The professor recommended Ms. Fujimoto, a well-respected medium with years of experience dealing with restless spirits. Nako and Hiroshi felt a renewed sense of hope. With the professor's guidance and Ms. Fujimoto's assistance, they believed they could finally lay the spirits to rest. They contacted Ms. Fujimoto, who agreed to help after hearing their story. She sensed the urgency and the danger of the situation and prepared for the ritual with meticulous care. A few days later, they set out for the village once more. this time with the professor and Ms. Fujimoto accompanying them. The journey was tense, filled with an unspoken fear of what awaited them at the house. As they approached the village, a sense of foreboding settled over the group. The house stood as ominously as ever, its windows dark and foreboding. Ms. Fujimoto instructed them to remain calm and follow her lead during the ritual. They entered the house, the atmosphere inside even more oppressive than before. Ms. Fujimoto set up the ritual in the living room. Where the presence felt strongest, she placed protective talismans around the room and lit incense to purify the air. As she began the ritual, chanting ancient incantations, the temperature dropped and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The house seemed to resist the ritual, its walls groaning and shifting. Nako and Hiroshi stood close to the professor, who offered words of reassurance. Ms. Fujimoto's chants grew louder, her voice steady and commanding. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A cold wind swept through the house, and the whispers turned into anguished wails. The presence grew stronger, and the room shook violently. Ms. Fujimoto remained focused, continuing her chants with unwavering determination. The professor joined in, lending his voice to the ritual. Nako and Hiroshi felt a powerful force trying to break through, but they stood their ground, drawing strength from the others. After what felt like an eternity, the wails subsided, and the room fell silent. The candles reignited on their own, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Ms. Fujimoto concluded the ritual, her face pale but resolute. She explained that the spirits had been appeased, but the house's dark history would always leave a lingering shadow. Nako and Hiroshi felt a sense of relief. Knowing they had done everything possible to bring peace to the restless spirits, they left the house for the final time, hoping to move on with their lives. Back in the village, the old villager, who had first told them about the house, awaited their return. He listened to their tale, nodding with understanding. He revealed that he was a descendant of the Sato family, tasked with watching over the house and ensuring the ritual was performed if needed. Nako and Hiroshi had fulfilled a duty that had been waiting for decades. As they departed the village, they felt a sense of closure. But the experience had changed them. They knew that the memory of the house and its haunting whispers would remain with them forever. They had faced the unknown and survived. But the shadow of the house would always be a part of their lives. The windows to nowhere were now sealed. But the fear and mystery of that night would never truly fade. With their mission complete, they hoped to move on and live their lives, free from the specter of the past. Yet, in the quiet moments, they would always remember the house and the unseen threat that had once nearly claimed them. The months following the ritual were a period of uneasy peace for Nako and Hiroshi. They both tried to resume their normal lives, but the shadow of the house lingered in their minds. Nako continued her photography, capturing the beauty of everyday life, but there was a new depth to her work, a darkness that seemed to reflect her inner turmoil. Hiroshi, ever the rationalist, threw himself into his job, hoping that work would distract him from the haunting memories. One evening, Nako received a phone call that shattered their fragile peace. It was from the old villager, his voice trembling with urgency. He told her that strange occurrences had started again in the village, and he feared the malevolent force from the house had not been fully eradicated. Nako's heart sank. She knew they had to return and finish what they started. She called Hiroshi, and without hesitation, he agreed to join her. They both understood that this was something they could not ignore. They arrived in the village late at night. The air was thick with tension, and an ominous silence hung over the streets. The old villager met them, his face lined with worry. He led them to the house, which looked even more foreboding than before. The windows were dark, and the air around it seemed colder, as if the house itself was exuding a malevolent aura. Nako and Hiroshi steeled themselves, knowing that this time they would have to confront the evil directly. Inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Nako felt a cold presence watching her, its eyes boring into her soul. Hiroshi, ever the protector, stayed close, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. They made their way to the living room where the ritual had been performed. The candles they had used were still there, now melted down to stubs. Fujimoto's talismans lay scattered, their power seemingly diminished. Nako and Hiroshi decided to explore the house once more, hoping to find any clue that could help them. As they moved through the darkened rooms, they noticed that the windows, which had previously been blocked, now showed faint glimpses of the garden they had seen in Ayumi's painting. The sight was unsettling, as if the house was trying to lure them into its grasp once again. Nako took a deep breath and pressed on, her resolve strengthening with each step. In one of the upstairs rooms, they found something unexpected, a hidden door behind an old bookshelf. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Nako felt a chill run down her spine, but she knew they had to explore every corner of the house. With Hiroshi leading the way, they descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, they found themselves in a small, dimly lit room. The room was filled with old furniture and covered in dust, but in the center stood an altar, surrounded by candles. On the altar was a small, ornate box, the same box that Ayumi had hidden in the house. Nako opened the box, revealing a collection of old photographs and letters. The photographs showed Ayumi and her family, their faces solemn and haunted. The letters were written in Ayumi's elegant but erratic handwriting, detailing her attempts to communicate with the spirits. As they read through the letters, they realized that Ayumi had discovered a way to banish the spirits for good. She had written about a final ritual, one that required a personal sacrifice. Nako's heart pounded as she understood the implications. The ritual they had performed was only a temporary solution. To truly end the haunting, they would need to make a sacrifice. Hiroshi looked at Nako, his eyes filled with determination. They both knew what needed to be done. With the letters as their guide, they set up the ritual in the basement. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers grew louder, as if the spirits were aware of their intentions. Nako lit the candles, her hands trembling slightly. Hiroshi stood beside her, his presence a source of strength. They began the chant, their voices steady and resolute. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around them. As they neared the end of the chant, the ground beneath them trembled. The whispers turned into anguished wails, and a powerful force tried to break through. Nako and Hiroshi held their ground, their voices unwavering. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A cold wind swept through the basement, and the presence grew stronger. Nako felt a hand grasp her arm, its grip icy and relentless. In that moment, Hiroshi stepped forward, his face set with determination. He understood that the sacrifice Ayumi had written about was not just a symbolic gesture. It required one of them to stay behind, to act as a conduit for the spirits. Without hesitation, Hiroshi placed his hand on the altar, his voice steady as he continued the chant. Nako tried to stop him, but he shook his head, his eyes filled with resolve. He knew that this was the only way to save them both. The air around them crackled with energy, and the force trying to break through intensified. Nako's heart ached, but she continued the chant, her voice joining Hiroshi's. As the final words were spoken, the ground shook violently, and the wails reached a deafening crescendo. A blinding light filled the room, and Nako felt herself being pulled away, the grip on her arm releasing. When the light faded, she found herself alone in the basement, the candles extinguished and the altar empty. Tears streamed down her face as she realized what had happened. Hiroshi had made the ultimate sacrifice to banish the spirits and protect her. The house was silent, its malevolent presence gone. Nako knew that Hiroshi's sacrifice had been successful, but the pain of losing him was almost unbearable. She made her way back upstairs, her steps heavy with grief. The house, now devoid of its dark power, seemed just an empty shell. As she stepped outside, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The old villager waited for her, his face etched with sorrow. He understood what had transpired and offered words of comfort. Nako knew that she had to carry on to honor Hiroshi's memory and the sacrifice he had made. She returned to the city, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. In the months that followed, Nako dedicated herself to her photography. Capturing the beauty and fragility of life, her work took on a new depth, reflecting the profound loss and the strength she had found in the face of darkness. She never forgot Hiroshi or the house that had changed their lives forever. The memory of the windows to nowhere and the haunting whispers remained with her, a reminder of the night they had faced the unknown and emerged stronger. Nako found solace in her art, using it as a way to process her grief and to remember Hiroshi's bravery. She knew that he would always be with her, a guiding presence in her life. The house, now a distant memory, no longer held power over her. She had faced the final confrontation and emerged victorious, her spirit unyielding. The echoes of the past would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. Nako moved forward, carrying the lessons she had learned and the strength she had gained. She knew that life was fragile, but it was also filled with beauty and resilience. The darkness they had faced had only made her appreciate the light even more. And as she continued her journey, she felt Hiroshi's presence beside her, a constant reminder of the power of love and sacrifice. The story of the house and its windows to nowhere would remain a part of her, but it was no longer a source of fear. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of love. Nako had faced the final confrontation and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. And in the quiet moments, she would remember Hiroshi and the sacrifice he had made, knowing that his spirit lived on in her heart